Okay, so picture this. I'm standing in front of this massive academy that's just floating in the clouds like someone forgot to turn off the anti-gravity. The stone walls are literally pulsing with energy. Very reassuring. I'm squeezed in with thousands of young hopefuls at the bronze gates, and I'm doing my absolute best to look like everyone else. Wide-eyed, nervous, excited. You know, the classic, small-town kid sees the big city face. But my nervousness? Completely different reason. Point 180, 181. Are you kidding me? Just the welcome staff alone has over 180 golden core cultivators. Wait, no. In this world, they call them second-level official wizards. My eyeballs are literally twitching. Thank God everyone around me also looks like they're having an existential crisis, so I blend right in. Meanwhile, the grand total of MY cultivation? Chi refining, layer 1. The absolute bottom of the barrel. I've got barely a wisp of true energy rattling around inside me like a single coin in a piggy bank. What kind of cosmic joke is this? This world has spiritual energy so thin that even sand would complain about it. How the hell did it produce this many powerhouses? Did my cheat give me bootleg knowledge? If something goes wrong here, am I even going to make it out alive? I sneaked a look at those second-level wizards up front. Each one basically a walking nuclear warhead in human form. And the first-level wizards scattered around? Too many to even bother counting. Any one of them could freeze me in place just by accidentally leaking a bit of pressure. And here's me, who spent over a decade grinding through, refining essence into chi, a method so ancient it belongs in a cultivation museum, just to barely scratch layer 1. I really wanted to slap myself to check if I was dreaming. I've been in this world for a long time now. So long that my old life, the neon lights, the internet, all of it, feels like a fading dream. I became the son of some ordinary merchant in a backwater territory. Comfortable enough life, nothing special about my trajectory. Except for that little hidden feature buried deep in my consciousness. The librarian access. I took a deep breath, wrestled my roller coaster emotions into something manageable, and sent part of my awareness diving down into the depths of my soul, locking onto that grand white jade palace. The Great Tao Book Pavilion. That name. The moment I stepped into the talent assessment hall, it felt like walking into a completely different dimension. The ceiling stretched up so high it disappeared into what looked like actual stars twinkling overhead. The sheer scale of the place made you feel like an ant walking into a cathedral. A cathedral designed by someone who really wanted you to feel insignificant. The hall was packed with all kinds of bizarre-looking devices, each one humming with different types of energy, neatly arranged across different zones. Academy staff herded us into several lines, each heading toward a different testing station. Mental power strength test. Next, the low-level wizard doing the guiding had this deep voice with some kind of weird resonance effect built in, so it carried perfectly across the entire massive space. Even if you were hiding in a corner, you'd hear him crystal clear. I moved forward with my line, eyes darting everywhere, studying these testing devices I'd never seen before. First zone, a huge crystal ball swirling with blue light. You put your hand on it. It glows based on how strong your mental power is, and then a floating rune tablet next to it spits out a number. I watched some kid ahead of me nervously place his hand on the ball. The glow was so faint it was basically invisible. The tablet flashed, too. The color drained from his face instantly. He walked away looking like his soul had left his body. Mental sea depth test. Next, second zone. A heavy ancient stone platform covered in intricate runes. You sit on it and sink your mental power into it. The runes light up layer by layer, and the more layers you activate, the deeper your mental sea. Some girl sat down, and the runes barely flickered, one thin layer. The tablet read, depth level 3. She bit her lip, eyes going red, and got up to leave. Soul purity test. Elemental affinity test. Mental power condensation test. Willpower test. There were way more tests than I'd expected from the information I'd gathered back in my territory. They covered literally every dimension a wizard needs: strength, depth, and density of mental power, soul purity and resilience, natural affinity with different elements, even willpower and hidden potential. Every testing zone had a line in front of it. The atmosphere was dead serious. Nobody was talking. Just the low hum of the devices running and the guiding wizards calling out instructions in their deep, echoing voices. I ended up in the line for the mental power condensation test. The device looked like some kind of elaborate metal astrolabe. The person before me placed their hand on the center, and light started spreading outward across the disc. Most people's light looked scattered and messy, spreading slowly before stopping at a low mark on the scale. Next, jimming. That cold, echoing voice hit me like, all apprentices who passed the talent assessment proceed to the Central Plaza immediately. Major selection is about to begin. That cold announcement kept looping through the hall like the world's most stressful alarm clock. I'd barely stepped off the testing platform, hadn't even had time to process what just happened, and already I was getting swept along by a tidal wave of bodies toward the exit on the other side. Everyone around me was radiating anxiety and confusion. We hadn't even finished digesting our test results, and they were already shoving us toward the next life-altering decision. Classic. The exit opened straight into the Academy's Central Plaza, and the moment I stepped out, holy crap. This plaza was absurdly enormous. Like a miniature city. The ground was made of some black shimmering material that stretched all the way to the horizon, reflecting light from above. But the real showstopper? Massive magical holograms floating in the air above the plaza. Wizards slaughtering monsters on interdimensional battlefields. Spells crashing down like meteors. Every attack accompanied by earth-shaking sound effects and eye-melting visual effects. Terrifying alien creatures, crumbling ancient ruins, gigantic magical constructs flying through starlit skies, all displayed in the most in-your-face, adrenaline-pumping way possible. And underneath the footage, giant glowing rune text flashing like neon billboards. Glory awaits. Unlimited wealth. Fast track to promotion. Join the combat department. Become a legend. I stared at it all and thought, this is literally a military recruitment ad. They're running propaganda in a school. Then a massive wizard projection materialized in midair. His expression was stone cold, his voice echoing across the plaza like it was coming from deep space, completely devoid of emotion. Welcome to Nolan Academy. The Academy will provide you with the finest supernatural knowledge, helping you ignite your spiritual fire and construct your truth ring. But power is not free. According to the principle of equivalent exchange, every apprentice must sign a contract with the Academy. Once you reach a certain level of strength or complete a set period of study, you will be sent through the Star Rail network to other planes to expand territory for the Federation and the Academy. His cold gaze swept over the sea of tiny humans below. Not a single inflection in his voice. Now, you must choose between two majors, the Combat Department, representing power and conquest, or the Logistics Department, representing creation and support. You have one day to make your choice. This is your only chance. Once selected, it cannot be changed. And then he just dissolved. Thanks for the warm welcome, buddy. Immediately, a massive magical barrier rose up in the center of the plaza, splitting the whole area in two like a giant dividing wall. Big signs floated above. Combat on one side, logistics on the other. Under combat, smaller signs marked subcategories, soul department, energy shaping, summoning, stuff like that. On the logistics side, alchemy, magical pharmacology, enchanting, construct engineering. The zones closest to us apprentices. I honestly scared myself with the conclusion I'd just reached. No way. That can't be right. I tried to talk myself out of it. I mean, Nolan Academy recruits across the entire plane every 5 years. Even with strict requirements, each class has thousands of students. If only about 100 come back from the front lines. What kind of death rate are we talking about here? But the thought stuck to me like a dark cloud I couldn't shake off. I glanced over at the combat department's area. They'd moved into a Q&A session now. A bunch of confident, glowing returning wizards answering questions from starry-eyed apprentices, sharing battlefield stories, the whole place buzzing with energy. This is literally a fan meet and greet. I muttered that under my breath, then turned around and walked the other way. Over on the logistics side, a small group of wizards stood together looking tired and weathered. They wore standard-issue logistics robes with emblems on their chests, crucibles for alchemy, flasks for pharmacology, runes for formation studies. These guys looked plain. Some of their robes were actually kind of old. Most of them were only first-level official wizards, and 2 of them were still just third-level apprentices. Their eyes didn't have that sharp, confident edge the combat wizards had. Instead, they carried a quiet calm that comes from having seen some stuff. Meanwhile, the combat wizards from the same graduating class, completely different league, powerful auras, impressive achievements across the board. And that's when I realized the Academy sent these two groups back together on purpose. The whole point was comparison marketing. Put the shiny combat heroes next to the modest logistics folks and let the contrast do the selling. The second I turned toward them, every single logistics wizard locked eyes on me at once. I walked up calmly and asked politely, "Excuse me, seniors. I'm a new apprentice this year, still deciding on my major. Would you mind if I asked a few questions?" They exchanged glances, and I caught a hint of amusement in their eyes. An alchemy wizard spoke first. "New kid? Asking about logistics, huh? What? You're not going to try your luck in combat? The benefits there are genuinely better than ours. Having a bunch of wizards way stronger than me all staring at me at once was not comfortable, even without them releasing any pressure intentionally. But years of grinding through cultivation had toughened up my willpower considerably. I shook my head sincerely. I'm not really interested in fighting and killing. And honestly, the battlefield scares me. Being scared of the battlefield is normal. You're a newbie after all. A pharmacology wizard chimed in. But logistics, how do I put this? Promotion is slower than combat, and you have to fight for resources yourself. What I want to know, another wizard cut in, eyeing me curiously, is why you think we'd answer your questions at all. Wizards follow the principle of equivalent exchange for knowledge. You don't exactly have anything to offer us, do you? Because I didn't say it out loud. I just turned my gaze toward the combat wizards on the other stage, still doing their big interactive show with the new apprentices. The logistics wizards followed my eyes in perfect unison. Then they all started laughing. You guessed right. We all received orders to cooperate with the Academy's promotional efforts, the alchemy wizard said, looking at me with clear approval. Our assignment does include answering new student questions. Though contract restrictions apply, each new student gets one question only, and I can only answer things you already know, are about to know, or aren't restricted by contract. If your question crosses those lines, I have the right to refuse. So, what do you want to ask? I didn't hesitate. Why are there only 97 returning combat wizards over there for the promotional event? Dead silence. Every logistics wizard just stared at me. Different expressions, surprise, amusement, recognition, but all of them locked onto me until I started feeling genuinely uncomfortable. Then a construct engineering wizard burst out laughing. Huh, this kid is way smarter than I was at his age. Another one started recruiting me on the spot. Kid, come to Rune Studies. With a brain like yours, you could be somebody big. Hey, HEY, you can't just recruit openly. You want to violate the contract? And keep your voices down. You want other students to hear? The alchemy wizard. Jack's words hit my brain like a lightning bolt, instantly illuminating the brutal truth hiding behind all that flashy academy propaganda. 5 years. Out of over 5,000 students, only 153 came back alive. And these weren't random nobodies. These were trained wizards with 10 years of professional education under their belts. Those shiny, impressive returning wizards on stage? They were the tiny handful of survivors who crawled out of a meat grinder. And the Academy was parading them around like trophies to lure more clueless young people into becoming the next batch of cannon fodder. A chill sank straight into my bones. This wizard world was way more brutal than I'd imagined. The Academy wasn't some noble hall of learning. It was a factory. A conveyor belt feeding fresh bodies into a massive war machine. They needed fuel and new apprentices. We were the easiest things to set on fire. The 30-year contract for logistics wasn't just a chain around your neck. With death rates this high, that long contract actually meant the Academy expected logistics wizards to survive long enough to serve it out. A backhanded compliment, really. But even so, logistics had nearly 50% mortality. In combat, the 5-year contract said it all. Wizards aren't charity workers. If they set the payback period at just 5 years, it meant they considered it a win if a combat wizard survived that long. That's how fast people were dying. Aren't you scared? I blurted out without thinking. Technically, I'd already used up my one question as a new student, but the wizards didn't blow me off. They looked at each other, went quiet for a moment, then burst out laughing. Ha ha ha. Of course we're scared. People who aren't afraid of death might exist, but they're definitely the minority. The pharmacology wizard chuckled and ruffled my hair. I must have looked confused, because Jack read my expression and smiled. Don't understand why we still do it. Yeah, we're scared of dying, sure. But there's something even more compelling pushing us forward. What? The multiverse is vast. So vast that an entire plane being destroyed is just a tiny flickering star in the grand scheme. But flip that around. It also means nearly infinite possibilities. He pointed at the combat stage, where that third-level wizard Mars was currently signing autographs for apprentices like some kind of celebrity. See him? Mars only had third-level talent. Theoretically, he should never have been able to become an official wizard in his lifetime. But look at him now. Knowledge, power, longer life, status, glory, wealth. Any desire can be fulfilled somewhere in the endless plains. All you have to do is merely survive the battlefield. When you're chasing your dreams and desires, even an insane death rate is just a necessary cost. My heart sank hearing that. A necessary cost, huh? Such casual words covering up unimaginable bloodshed. The noise and hype filling the plaza suddenly sounded sharp and dangerous in my ears. All those young faces burning with desire for glory and power. I could practically see their futures already. Lying dead on some alien battlefield in a world they'd never heard of. What a cruel world, I muttered. But also a world full of hope, isn't it? Jack smiled meaningfully, seeing my mood dropping. Besides, the death rate for logistics isn't that bad. After all, logistics is Nolan's true orthodox path. What do you mean? I blinked. No point hiding this from you. You'll figure it out yourself the moment you sign the contract anyway. Jack looked around casually. This plane we're on is called Nolan Plane No. 13. The so-called Nolan Academy is really just a basic training ground that feeds fresh blood into a larger wizard organization. So when you sign your contract, you're not signing with the academy. You're signing with the organization behind it, and the name of that organization. Jack dragged it out dramatically. That is the Nolan Workshop. My eyelid twitched. That was a lot of information packed into a few sentences. Never mind the jaw-dropping fact that a single wizard organization had multiple planes serving as talent farms. Just the name alone was. I said goodbye to the wizards and turned to face the logistics department area stretching out in front of me. It was noticeably emptier than combat's side. I could feel it. The moment I turned around, all those logistics instructors who'd been acting like they couldn't care less suddenly had their eyes locked onto me like hawks. Obviously, that illusion barrier from earlier could fool regular apprentices, but to these instructors whose power levels I couldn't even begin to sense. Might as well have been made of tissue paper. I wasn't thrilled about any of this, but I was already on the pirate ship. Only option now was to keep sailing. I looked at the list of sub-disciplines in the logistics area, some names I recognized, some I didn't, and my scalp went numb. This feels exactly like being a fresh high school graduate trying to pick a college major. I grumbled internally while wandering through the logistics zones, forcing my brain into cold, rational mode. I don't want to be here, but since I'm stuck at this academy with no way out anytime soon, I need to strengthen myself while keeping my secrets hidden. Whatever's coming on those battlefields, I have to be ready. Ideally, I would have just scrapped my cultivation entirely and switched over to this world's wizard power system. That would solve my biggest problem, hiding what I really am. But I couldn't. The refining essence in a chi method might be ancient and nearly obsolete, but it had one critical feature. It bound your essence, chi, and spirit, the three treasures, together more and more tightly as you practiced. In simple terms, if any one of the three got stronger, it would drag the other two up with it, like a three-legged stool that automatically levels itself. Sounds great, right? And it is, until you try to destroy your cultivation. Because those three are so tightly linked, if I ripped out my cultivation, my body and soul would take catastrophic, nearly irreparable damage simultaneously. Forget becoming a wizard. I might not even survive the process. So I can't get rid of it. That means I have to disguise it as a local power instead. Maybe once I become an official wizard, I'll find another way. Okay, add that to the plan. Now I also need to think about my future development path. I started taking honest stock of myself. Compared to other wizards, what did I actually? I gave the contract scroll a quick once-over. Pretty much the same stuff as what was on the alchemy promotional display, just with more detail. During the apprentice period, the Academy's alchemy workshop would provide basic food and housing, systematic knowledge training, and a limited budget of experimental resources. In return, apprentices had to complete study assignments and workshop chores, earn credits, and use those credits to exchange for higher-level knowledge and materials. The obligation part. Once you hit first-level official wizard, or after 10 years of study, whichever came first, you owed the workshop 30 years of frontline service. During that time you follow orders, do whatever they tell you. Brewing potions, repairing equipment, participating in research projects, the works. And breaking the contract? Oh, the penalties were lovely. Not just massive fines and credits and resources, they damage your soul directly. Mild case, your mental power deteriorates. Severe case, your soul collapses entirely. A fate worse than death. Why not just kill the contract breaker, you ask? Well, because wizards themselves make excellent research material. When you're short on manpower, you don't throw away perfectly good lab rats. How heartwarming. I have no questions, instructor, I said, looking up with steady eyes. Instructor Clark glanced at me, a faint flicker passing through his gaze. That smug grin he'd been wearing in front of the other instructors had vanished, replaced by his usual stone-cold expression. He nodded and gestured for me to drip a drop of blood onto the scroll, then extracted a tiny wisp of my mental power from my head and fused it into the parchment. Blood seeped in. Mental power merged. The scroll exploded with light, way brighter than before. Complex runes danced and flickered across its surface, then collapsed into a single streak of light that shot straight into the apprentice badge in Clark's hand. The little alchemy crucible engraved on the badge seemed to come alive for a second, glowing faintly. Contract sealed. Just like that, I'd signed away a significant chunk of my future. Instructor Clark tucked the scroll away, his tone flat again. Good. Since you've chosen alchemy, you'll need patience and resolve. There are no thrilling adventures here, just experiments, calculations, and failure, day after day. But if you stick with it, the rewards won't disappoint you. He reached under the desk and pulled out 2 thick books and a heavy-looking wooden box. This is the Basic Alchemy Handbook, covering. After overthinking for way too long, I finally got my head straight and sat down to sort through the stuff in the box. Passed the first hurdle, but I cannot let my guard down. No way to know if there are wizard surveillance spells in this dorm room. Gotta play it safe. Absolutely no cultivation shenanigans for now. Since cultivating was off the table, time to learn what I could. Clark gave me 10 days, so priority number 1 was mastering the basic meditation method, the absolute foundation of the wizard system. Without igniting my spiritual fire, I couldn't even start down the wizard path. I found a comfortable position on the bed and pulled out the thick meditation book. The pages seemed to be made of some kind of metal, and every word on them hummed with a faint, strange energy. After flipping through it, I figured out the core concept. The whole thing revolved around visualization and engraving. You empty your mind, pull your mental power inward, then use that mental power to draw specific geometric patterns inside your mental sea. These patterns weren't random doodles. They were the result of countless years of research by ancient wizard scholars. Simplified versions of truth runes that perfectly aligned with this world's energy system. Successfully engraving them in your mental sea would attract free-floating energy particles from outside, nourish your mental power, and build your own spiritual circuits. That was the entry ticket to being a wizard. The first meditation pattern had 5 main components that combined into a rough, abstract, triangular pyramid shape. The book recommended beginners practice each component individually before trying to combine them. I closed my eyes and stuck the book under my head like a pillow. Normal newbies actually needed to do this. The book was thick not just because of content, but because it was packed with formation arrays designed to help beginners sink into their mental sea. I obviously didn't need the help. I was just doing it for appearances in case anyone was watching. My consciousness dropped into my mental sea with practiced ease. Down here, I could feel my mental power, abnormally refined and condensed from years of cultivation training. Following the meditation guide, I started drawing the first component pattern with my mental power. It was a strange sensation. My mental power moved like a tentacle, carefully tracing lines in the void of my mental sea. And it was shockingly easy. Years of cultivation had given me a level of mental power control that was frankly absurd. Drawing patterns with spiritual energy felt as natural as writing with a pen on paper. My lines were smooth, stable, precise. The pattern took shape rapidly, and I was one final stroke away from perfect completion. Then my gut screamed at me. Wait. I slammed the brakes on that last stroke and deliberately drew it wrong. Boom. The nearly perfect pattern shattered. All the mental power I'd gathered during the process lost its guide rails and went haywire. An invisible shockwave of spiritual energy erupted inside my mental sea, rattling my entire consciousness. I grunted. Everything went dizzy. My mental sea felt like someone had shoved a giant hand in and stirred it like soup. It hurt, but I steadied myself immediately and assessed the damage from my little failure. The impact was uncomfortable, but ultimately minor. Just a light shake-up, nothing serious. That was close. I almost forgot about the control gap. After all those years of cultivation, my actual skill at engraving and controlling mental power was way beyond what a fresh apprentice with level 6 talent should be capable of. A normal student who just picked up the meditation book for the first time should not be able to draw truth runes this easily. If I'd completed that pattern perfectly on my first try, that would have been a giant red flag screaming, "This guy is not normal," to anyone paying attention. Based on a normal level 6 talent's recovery speed. I need to rest for about an hour now, but just because I was resting didn't mean I had to sit around doing nothing. I looked around my dorm, basic but functional. Then down at the basic alchemy handbook and that box of alchemy tools on the desk. If I was going to play the part of a hardworking little alchemy apprentice, just meditating wasn't enough. Gotta sell the whole package. I pulled out the student handbook that Clark had tucked into the wooden box and started reading through it carefully. It covered the academy structure, class schedules, the credit system, public facilities, and various rules and regulations. Pretty standard orientation stuff. One thing jumped out though, credits were everything here. They were the only currency for unlocking higher-level knowledge, rare materials, lab rentals, and even personal mentoring sessions with instructors. Lab rentals. That one got my brain spinning. I didn't know all the details yet, but I had a pretty solid grasp on one thing about this world. Wizards valued knowledge above everything. And they were incredibly stingy about it too. Made sense. In this world, knowledge literally becomes power. Which meant, labs should be surveillance-free zones, right? If wizards found out someone had secretly installed monitoring devices in a laboratory, a place where people work on their private research, the entire wizard community would lose their collective minds. The backlash would be nuclear. If I want a safe, private space to do my own thing, I need to get my hands on a personal lab. The handbook mentioned you could rent a private lab long-term with credits. It didn't say how many credits, but I could already tell it wasn't going to be cheap. So now my to-do list had a shiny new addition: earn credits. Lots of them. I finished the handbook pretty quickly, checked the time, and since my mental sea was still recovering, I picked up the basic alchemy handbook and started going through it. The content was incredibly detailed: material classifications, property identification, fundamental alchemy principles, formulas, experimental procedures. The writing was dense, the formulas were complex, and a lot of the concepts were completely new to me. Luckily, I had the Great Tao Book Pavilion as my cheat code. All those years of, "Hi, are you a new alchemy apprentice too?" "So am I." I frowned slightly, barely enough for anyone to notice, then smoothed my expression back to neutral. I looked up. A girl with curly brown hair and a bright smile was standing right next to my table. Her eyes were sharp and lively, darting around like she was curious about absolutely everything. "Hello," I replied, quietly sizing her up. Her clothes weren't fancy, but they were clean and neat. She looked a bit tired, probably failed the basic meditation a few times already, but the energy radiating off her completely overpowered any signs of fatigue. As for her mental power signature, 5-level talent. Upper middle among the apprentices I'd scanned so far. Not bad. I see the crucible on your badge, alchemy. Finally, someone from my class. She plopped herself down in the empty seat across from me without even asking. Her food tray looked like a small mountain. Every type of food available, piled high. This girl could eat. "I'm Amy. Amy Greyfinch." She stuck out her hand with a grin. "What's your name? You look kinda lonely sitting here all by yourself." My internal alarm bells cranked up a notch. In a place where I knew absolutely nobody, a fellow apprentice with decent talent walks up to me out of nowhere, all smiles and friendliness, completely unprompted. Way too suspicious. My cultivator's instincts caught it immediately. Behind those seemingly casual, carefree eyes, there was a subtle, evaluating look. She was scanning me while pretending to just chat. Testing me? Fishing for information? Or something else entirely? Gymming, I said. Short. Simple. Gave her nothing extra to work with. Gymming. Great to meet you. Amy acted like she didn't notice my coldness at all, and somehow smiled even more warmly. Today absolutely killed me, especially the meditation. Did you try drawing the patterns in your mental sea yet? Oh my god, those designs are insanely complicated. My mental power felt like wet noodles, couldn't hold any shape. Got backlash multiple times. I thought my head was gonna explode. She grabbed a piece of roast meat and started devouring it while talking, completely ignoring any concept of table manners. On the surface, she came across as an open, cheerful, zero-filter kind of person with not a single hidden thought in her head. Yeah, right. 10 days flew by in a blink, and it was finally time for Clark's first class. I got up extra early, ate breakfast, and followed the handbook's directions to the alchemy workshop. The workshop sat in a relatively remote corner of the academy grounds. No flashy towers or impressive architecture, just a squat, heavy building that looked like a fortress someone had hammered into the earth. The outer walls were made of dark stone carved with basic runes all over. Inside, the space opened up wide. The air was a cocktail of metal, mineral, plant, and various bizarre chemical smells. Weird, but not terrible. Since I was way early, I figured I'd wander around and explore. The interior was like a giant beehive, countless rooms and hallways of different sizes branching off everywhere. Raw material warehouses, high-temperature furnace zones, potion brewing areas packed with distilling equipment and test tubes, and tons of basic and advanced labs. Our first class was in a spacious basic alchemy lab on the east side. The walls were silvery white metal, lined with dozens of sturdy workstations. Each one had an adjustable magical light overhead, a set of fixed metal clamps, and an exhaust chimney. When I walked in, I was surprised to find quite a few people already there. But checking their badge emblems, only 3 of us were actually alchemy apprentices: me, Amy, and one other guy with a noticeably arrogant expression on his face. Everyone else belonged to other departments. I even spotted that genius from the aptitude test, the one who scored a 9 in soul purity and got scooped up as a direct disciple by a soul department instructor on the spot. A crowd of apprentices had already gathered around the guy like moths to a flame. I had zero interest in joining that circus. I found a quiet spot by the wall and settled in. What did surprise me was that Amy was here too, and she wasn't over there schmoozing with the group. "You're not hanging out with them?" I asked, genuinely a bit shocked. Over the past 10 days, I'd bumped into her in the cafeteria a few times and we'd chatted. I'd confirmed that this girl was absolutely a social butterfly. She could make friends with a brick wall if she tried hard enough. So seeing her not, everyone's heads snapped toward the noise. Some apprentice was on the floor, his workstation a complete disaster zone. Metal shards scattered everywhere. Turns out this genius hadn't been practicing with gold like the rest of us. No, he'd gone for some hard, unstable metal instead. His mental power lost control during shaping, and the whole thing basically exploded. But here's the truly horrifying part. Some of those metal fragments didn't just hit him. They embedded themselves into his arm and face. And they weren't just sitting there like normal shrapnel. They were growing, fusing into his flesh like living things, burrowing deeper while he screamed bloody murder. The idiot had accidentally given the metal some kind of flesh-eating property during the alchemy process. Instructor Clark's face went stone cold. He walked over but did not rush to help. He stood there, looked down at the kid rolling around in agony, and actually smirked. "Pathetic," he said, voice like ice. "How many times did I say follow safety protocols? No unknown or unstable materials during basic practice. No attempting dangerous alchemy processes without permission." He swept his gaze across the rest of us. Every face in the room had gone white. Every year there's one of these fools. A little cleverness, a little courage, and they think they can skip straight to the top. This is what happens when your shape control isn't up to standard. Sloppy mental power plus wrong energy guidance equals a monster that hurts everyone, starting with you. Then he turned back to the screaming kid. "Damage to the lab plus medical fees, 15 credits deducted. Pay it back within a month, or there are plenty of wizards looking for new test subjects. Without even moving a finger visibly, two bumps appeared on the silver-white metal wall. Two blobs of liquid metal dropped to the floor, twisted and morphed, and became humanoid puppet golems. "Take this fool to medical." Their eyes lit up red. They grabbed the kid by his arms and legs, completely ignoring his thrashing, and carried him out like luggage. Whenever the metal fragments in his body accidentally touched the golem's surface, they'd snap off, and blood would pour from the broken ends. The fusion had gone way deeper than anyone expected. That scene right there? It shattered every romantic fantasy about alchemy that anyone in the room might have been holding on to. Alchemy was magic, sure, but it was also strict, dangerous, and it would absolutely destroy you if you got careless. "Before next class, I expect all of you to demonstrate proper gold shaping," Clark announced. And that was how our first alchemy lesson ended. In horror and homework, we filed out carrying our deformed gold blocks and some very heavy feelings. I stood at my workstation staring at my ugly little gold cube, and an idea started forming in my head. I heard that poor guy's father is actually an alchemy wizard. Amy materialized beside me out of nowhere like she always does. He'd been showing off how much he knew about alchemy, so even though he chose pharmacology, he wanted to forge a weapon to impress everyone. Didn't expect it to go that wrong, though. I snapped out of my thoughts and glanced at her. "What are you doing next?" "Nothing special. Going back to practice alchemy shapes, obviously." "You?" "Same." "Hey, do you know any good ways to earn credits? For senior apprentices there are tons. Selling potions, trading weapons, completing commissions, submitting academic research. All of those pay credits." Amy shrugged. "But for us right now, we can only do manual labor for the alchemy workshop." "Why? You want to buy something?" "I'm thinking about renting a lab," I said, not bothering to hide it. My secrets were too many and too dangerous. A private lab was a necessity, and there was no way to keep that goal hidden from people around me anyway. "I don't think you're the type to waste resources carelessly, but fair warning. If you're just practicing gold shaping, your dorm room is enough for that," Amy pointed out. I shook my head. I walked up to the machine and placed my apprentice badge on the detection array at the bottom, copying what everyone else was doing. A light screen popped up showing a ton of detailed information, way more than what was on the big public board. This thing is basically a magic internet terminal. The commoners in this world are still living in the Middle Ages, but wizards have already built themselves a whole networked society. Then again, considering these people could wage war across multiple dimensions, having Wi-Fi wasn't exactly shocking. "Let me look around." I started browsing my personal profile and immediately noticed something weird. My credit balance wasn't 0. "Wait, what?" 6 credits. Just sitting there. Confused, I pulled up the transaction details. Because there's less than a full month between enrollment and the next billing cycle, the Academy refunded the difference based on the contract's 10 credits per month rate. Hold up, I was genuinely stunned. Not just at the resources it would take to refund thousands of students, but at the fact that the Academy actually did it. They honored the contract down to the last fraction of a month. This generous? Even back in my previous life's modern society with actual laws, most organizations wouldn't bother with something like this. But beyond the surprise, excitement was building. These wizards took contract integrity to a level way beyond what I'd expected. Even if this was probably just a calculated move to win loyalty, I couldn't help but feel a bit of genuine respect. An organization willing to follow its own rules. And the rules are actually fair? Yeah, I can work with that. With these unexpected startup credits, the pressure on me eased up immediately. I started searching for lab rental information. Small basic lab. 10 hours costs 5 credits. But renting one for a full month is only 200 credits. What? That price gap is insane. But the good news was my credits were just barely enough to get started. I casually walked away from the terminal, grabbed dinner at the cafeteria like everything was totally normal, then headed back to my dorm. Door closed. I sat cross-legged on my bed, looking like I was meditating. But actually, my consciousness, the so-called lab, was a tiny room, maybe 10 square meters at best. No sleek metal walls like the main workshop, just rough stone, a basic rune-covered floor, a simple workstation in the middle, a magic lamp hanging overhead, and some starter equipment shoved in the corner, a small crucible, bellows, water basin. The bare minimum. But the important part? Runes carved into all 4 corners and the door frame. So this is the basic detection blocking array. I locked the door and felt the faint energy hum as the array activated. Sure, this level of protection probably wouldn't stop a high-level wizard who really wanted to peek inside. But if anyone tried to brute force through the barrier, it would set off enough noise to work as a warning system. Good enough. Everything in this lab was cheap and basic. Honestly, aside from the privacy arrays, it was pretty much worthless. But then I spotted something in the corner that actually made me happy. Wait, there's an independent MagicNet terminal in here. Same kind of machine as the ones in the task hall, tucked away in the corner of my lab. I swiped my badge and logged in. The content here was even richer than the task hall version. Beyond the standard missions, there was a whole marketplace where different labs could buy and sell materials and products from each other. They even offer free delivery on basic supplies. That's way better than the task hall. Over there you had to pick everything up yourself. But here, basic materials could just show up at your lab door. And for common stuff, the credit-to-value ratio was surprisingly generous. Even more interesting, between the posted tasks, purchase requests, and lab-to-lab transactions, this system had started developing into something that looked a lot like an early version of an internet forum from my previous life. Unfortunately, in a world where knowledge was worth more than anything, most discussions stayed surface level. Nobody wanted to give away real information for free. So even though this proto-forum had been around for a while, it was still barely more than an embryo. Still, even in those shallow discussions, little bits of useful information leaked through. After I submitted my refined gold for the sales review, I spent a good long while feeling pretty smug about myself. I was already imagining the whole beautiful picture. Sell the refined gold, rake in credits, use credits to power up to make more refined gold, create a perfect resource loop, become an unstoppable force of nature. The dream. Whenever I spotted other apprentices running around desperately grinding for credits, I kept my face neutral, but inside, pure smugness. See, without unique technology and production methods, you're just getting exploited. These backbreaking jobs with garbage pay, even a dog wouldn't do them. A dog wouldn't do them, but here I am, and I love doing tasks. I've never been happier. Distillation Tower number 3. My face was doing things faces shouldn't do. The air here was a revolting cocktail of rotting plants and expired potions. I was wearing a heavy hazmat suit, sealed goggles, a mask, and holding a long-handled scraper and a rag soaked in chemicals that could strip paint off a dragon. My job? Clean the inside of this massive metal distillation tower. 10 stories tall. Minimum. Whatever they'd been cooking in here had left behind this tar-like black sludge coating the inside. Apparently the stuff was so sensitive to energy that you couldn't use any magic to remove it. Pure manual labor only. I had to crawl into the cramped interior and scrape, wipe, wash, inch by agonizing inch. Why was I here doing this? Don't even get me started. I'd thought finding refined gold, one of the materials wizards desperately needed, would solve all my money problems forever. Reality had other plans. My best case worst scenario was that nobody would want to buy my stuff. But it was even worse than that. I never even got to the selling stage. My submitted, white iron-based isolation material was sitting in the workshop's MagicNet system with one soul-crushing status, pending review. No matter how many times I checked, and I checked a lot, that status didn't budge. Not even a millimeter. Like someone had stuffed my application into a drawer and thrown away the entire desk. No review clearance meant no listing. No listing meant no sales. No sales meant no credits. My secret golden goose was stuck behind the world's most infuriating bureaucratic bottleneck. And my need for credits? Growing by the day like a tumor. Want to practice shaping with special materials after class? Credits. Want to analyze an unknown mineral with your new knowledge? Sorry, the detailed material properties encyclopedia requires credits to unlock. Want a slightly better crucible with mental power assist for complex experiments? Sure, pay credits to rent one. Everything in this academy ran on credits. The workshop didn't carry dead weight. They gave you food, a bed, and basic knowledge. Everything beyond that. You worked for it. What kind of bureaucratic hellhole is this? I cursed internally, but still put on the hazmat suit like a good little worker bee. The work was mind-numbing. The suit blocked most of the smell, but made every movement slow and clunky. The temperature inside the tower was brutal. Even with MY body conditioning, it was miserable. Sweat pooled inside my suit. The scraper shrieked against metal, echoing endlessly. "This is killing me," the apprentice next to me groaned, his suit caked in grime. I nodded in agreement. On the outside, I looked like I'd been beaten into silence by the sheer grind of manual labor. But inside, my mental power was working overtime. I was scanning the distillation tower's internal structure, the complex pipe connections, the energy transmission rune engravings, the way different metals were joined together. This was a living, breathing textbook. Every detail I picked up got fed straight to the great Tao Book Pavilion for cross-referencing and comparison analysis. This energy interface design, it's weirdly similar to basic artifact refining techniques in the pavilion's records. There's even some spatial folding principles involved. But the core is still rune-based energy conduction. I need to memorize this stuff. Gotta start studying rune studies on the side ASAP. So yeah, while everyone saw a miserable apprentice scraping tar, I was secretly absorbing Wizard World engineering knowledge and integrating it into my cultivation framework. Multitasking at its finest. By the time I got back to my dorm that evening, I collapsed onto my bed, mentally exhausted, but physically, not that bad actually. My true energy had even gotten more condensed from the exertion, and then I felt it. The energy inside me was building up like a pressure cooker. The barrier of Qi refining layer 1 was crumbling, ready to break through at any moment. I sat up into meditation position and looked into my mental sea. In that seemingly endless ocean, 3 gorgeous, complex patterns glowed at 3 points around the edges, continuously pulling elemental energy from outside into my body. In just over a month, I'd inscribed 3 truth runes representing alchemy's core concepts: transformation, fusion, and refinement. My meditation progress had reached the peak of a first-level apprentice. My mental sea had more than doubled in size since enrollment. Mental power was dense and active. One more truth rune, just one, and I'd officially become a second-level apprentice. But my natural talent reserves were now completely spent. From here on, I could only accumulate mental power the slow way, absorbing elemental energy through meditation. This was where the real geniuses had it easy. If even MY level 6 talent carried me effortlessly to peak first-level apprentice, those monsters with level 8 or 9 talent probably didn't hit empty until second level. Mental power accumulation was a slow game, so that wasn't my immediate worry. The real problem? My cultivation was about to break through too. It had only been 2 months since I'd been stuck at Qi refining layer 1, and already the barrier to the next layer was paper thin. The energy inside me was screaming to burst out, like a bomb with a fraying fuse. This was not good timing. The most unique thing about the refining essence in a Qi system was that it treated essence, Qi, and spirit as one unified whole. My mental power, that's the spirit part, had been skyrocketing thanks to wizard meditation. And because of that tight connection, it was dragging my body conditioning, essence, and my true energy, Qi, up along with it. And then those improvements fed back into strengthening my mental sea and soul, which boosted my meditation progress further. Left foot stepping on right foot. 2 completely separate power systems secretly turbocharging each other in the background, creating a near-infinite growth loop. If I hadn't dug through the Great Tao Book Pavilion and found several techniques specifically designed to suppress breakthroughs and stabilize foundations, I'd probably be way past Qi refining layer 1 by now. But even with those suppression methods, at peak layer 1, I was running out of ability to hold it back. The true energy inside me was like floodwater pressing against a crumbling dam, ready to smash through to layer 2 at any second. And if I broke through in my dorm, the energy burst would be massive. The Academy's surveillance arrays were everywhere. Some random wizard walking by might sense the anomaly. That would be a catastrophe of the highest order. I needed a safe, isolated space for the breakthrough, like, say, a lab with a decent isolation array. But guess what? My brilliant business venture had crashed and burned before it even took off, and my wallet was emptier than my patience. This was actually a huge reason I'd been desperately hunting for tasks. Never in a million years did I think that in a world with spiritual energy so thin it was basically non-existent, my biggest problem would be holding back. A breakthrough I couldn't afford to have. Stupid credits. I looked out the window at the deep night sky, then felt the raging torrent of energy inside me. Time was running out. I had to earn enough credits to rent a lab before this breakthrough happened, whether I wanted it to or not. With a heavy sigh, I left my dorm and sprinted toward the task hall in a nearby building. The distillation tower cleaning job paid per session, and the next round wouldn't start for 10 more days. I needed to find something else to fill the credit gap. At the task board, there was always a crowd of apprentices gathered around, staring at the constantly refreshing task listings with hungry eyes. I joined them. My gaze drifted through the window toward the distant sky. And right at that moment, the strangest feeling I'd ever experienced washed over me. To normal eyes, it was just ordinary dawn sunlight. A wizard would probably see dense energy particles and colorful rays. But with my freshly breakthrough senses cranked up to maximum sensitivity, I spotted something buried deep in the core of that rising sunlight. A faint trace of purple. It was barely there, like some ancient, mysterious energy condensed in the heart of the sun itself. Just hovering, waiting. Purple chi from the east. My heart nearly stopped. The Great Tao Book Pavilion actually had records about this. At certain celestial alignments, the moment the sun rises, its core releases a wisp of supremely pure primordial energy, insanely beneficial for cultivators. It only exists for a split second at sunrise, incredibly rare, and catching even a trace is considered extraordinary luck. I'd always assumed something this deeply cultivation-flavored could only exist in whatever distant cultivation world these techniques originally came from. But here I was, in a wizard world, inside a lab at Nolan Academy, and I was seeing it with my own eyes. No time to think about why. Pure cultivator instinct kicked in, and I activated my technique. My freshly advanced Layer 2 true energy circulated through the proper channels, reaching out to that purple wisp floating in the sunlight. It responded, drifting through the walls and windows of my lab, completely ignoring the isolation arrays and surveillance formations. As far as the wizard security systems were concerned, this stuff didn't even exist. But the moment it entered my body, the effects were immediate. The purple chi dissolved into my true energy and started cycling through me. It refined my true energy, making it denser, purer. It cleansed my body. Everything felt transparent and light in a way I'd never experienced. And the most shocking part? It was purifying my mental power. My mental sea became clearer, brighter. Tiny spiritual impurities got stripped away. Purifying mental power. In the wizard world, that was basically a miracle substance that could increase your innate talent rating. Wizard talent was largely based on soul purity and mental sea depth. This purple chi could upgrade those fundamental qualities. And the craziest part? Getting it was almost effortless. Just wake up before sunrise, run the technique, absorb. Free power-up every single morning. Like the universe was handing out gifts. But why did cultivation world purple chi exist in the wizard world? I thought about the refined gold I'd made earlier. When I'd used cultivation methods to refine regular gold, a huge amount of mass just vanished, leaving behind a substance containing the concept of eternal unchanging. That violated mass energy conservation. It was more like I'd been refining something invisible and intangible. I sent a query to the Great Tao Book Pavilion. 3 books appeared instantly. Chronicles of Dust and Calamity, True Explanation of the Mysterious Pivot, Introduction to Concept Harvesting and Manifestation, The Tao of Artifacts, Concept Attachment, and Low Spirit Crafting. What kind of names are these? The last 2 were crafting knowledge. The first was basically a memoir by a Mahayana stage cultivator called Dust Calamity Master, who'd been born during the cultivation world's apocalyptic final era, when spiritual energy had nearly vanished completely. Traditional spirit materials were just legends by then. Yet somehow, cultivation didn't die out. It actually thrived. After careful reading, I confirmed these 3 books answered my question perfectly. The cultivation system isn't purely about refining energy. The knowledge unfolded in my mind. According to this memoir, in the later stages of cultivation history, as resources dried up and understanding of the universe deepened, the raw materials used for cultivation and crafting gradually shifted from physical spirit materials to abstract concepts. When I refined gold into refined gold, I wasn't compressing physical mass. I was using true energy and spiritual awareness to strip away every concept related to mundane and change, then condensing the concept of eternal unchanging onto a tiny portion of matter. The lost mass was actually the discarded mundane concepts dissipating. Purple chi from the East works the same way. It's not energy. It's not gas. It's the manifestation of a grand concept. Dawn, hope, rebirth, that permeates the universe at that precise moment when the sun is about to rise, when yin and yang shift, when the old gives way to the new. What cultivators absorb is that concept itself, using it to cleanse and refine themselves. Over billions of years of development, cultivation techniques evolved methods to make these abstract concepts perceptible, which is why I see purple light, and absorbable through true energy guidance. I closed all 3 books. My mind was a thunderstorm. This revelation demolished everything I thought I knew about both cultivation and the wizard world. Cultivation was already playing with concept refinement at the chi refining stage, and because concepts exist everywhere, I could manifest purple chi from the East, even in a wizard world. My brain was running at full speed. Infinite new possibilities were exploding in my head. If this was true, I would never be limited by raw materials. Through concept extraction, not just gold, even ordinary air and dirt could be refined into supermaterials beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The things I could do in the future would exceed everyone's expectations. I took a deep breath and forced down the euphoria threatening to overwhelm me. I looked at the sun, now fully risen outside my window, eyes burning bright. A slightly balding wizard spoke up, his voice carrying a hint of depth. I also checked his fate threads. Very clean. Within the traceable time frame, there are no connection traces to any unknown powerful beings. The other wizards in the room shot him envious looks. Both time-based and fate-based wizard arts were incredibly complex, the kind of detection that required at least a 6th-level wizard. Way deeper and harder to fake than the previous checks. Even among a room full of geniuses who could all reach 5th level, there were still gaps in talent. Clearly, Baldy here was the most gifted person in the room. What about the dean? Someone raised the final critical question. After all the previous rounds of investigation, they'd theoretically confirmed my situation already. But just to be absolutely safe, they needed the highest level verification. And the highest level meant accessing the plane's source data. Only the dean, who actually controlled the entire plane, could do that. From the void, a message arrived. No emotional fluctuation whatsoever. Pure mental power transmission, plane source data checked. No traces of any foreign higher life forms or higher energy intrusions within the past century. Everyone in the room nodded. Baldy delivered the conclusion. Then we can essentially confirm that this apprentice is not a spy from another civilization, nor a puppet being remotely controlled by some unknown powerful entity. Unless whatever contacted him exceeds a 9th-level wizard. He hadn't even finished the sentence before several other wizards burst out laughing. A 9th-level wizard. That was the stuff of legends. The rulers of the entire wizard civilization. The parliament speakers standing at the apex of countless planes. For certain theoretical reasons, a 9th-level wizard's power was considered essentially infinite. If some being beyond that level actually bothered to manipulate a random apprentice, then even if these investigators did find evidence, they'd have to pretend they saw nothing. They'd probably have to play along with whatever sick game such a being was running, smile politely, and hope they didn't get erased from existence. But fortunately, based on current theory, it was virtually impossible for. Life had been pretty sweet lately. I'd cleared my name, solved my biggest problem, and scored myself upgraded permissions. According to Instructor Clark, the 2nd-level cultivation agreement didn't come with actual credits or material rewards, but it greased every wheel imaginable. Applications that would have taken forever now got greenlit instantly. My lab permit came through fast. I'd originally planned to rent a basic low-level lab long-term, but when I discovered the permit came with rental discounts, I went straight for a mid-level lab. Compared to the basic ones, the mid-level lab was bigger, had better protection arrays, more complete equipment, and, here's the kicker, it came with rest rooms and free food delivery straight from the cafeteria. Meaning if I wanted to, I could literally live in my lab. And apparently tons of wizards did exactly that. Research projects run 2 to 3 months minimum, sometimes years. Most official wizards basically ate and slept in their labs except for the occasional social obligation. For someone who needed to face the sunrise every morning to absorb purple chi, this setup was perfect. Why not go for a high-level lab? Because those things cost a fortune. Low-level labs range from 200 to 1,000 credits a month, depending on specs. Mid-level jumped straight to 2,000 minimum. And high-level? 20,000 a month. At minimum, I'd figured that once I could freely sell refined gold, credits would be flowing in like water. Reality smacked me right back into depression. First problem, yes, the sales restrictions were lifted, and yes, refined gold was so good it got bought out the second I listed it. But I'd completely overlooked the raw material bottleneck. Gold was basically useless to wizards. Outside of basic teaching materials and the occasional specialty equipment, nobody cared about it. The Academy could technically mobilize resources from all of Nolan Plane number 13 and dozens of surrounding minor planes, but they'd never bothered stockpiling gold. The Academy's entire gold reserves turned out to be a measly 23 cubic meters. And I just bought all of it. Getting more would take. I sat in my mid-level lab scrolling through the MagicNet's material catalog. From common copper and iron, to rare elemental crystals, to mineral samples from unknown star systems. Sure, I had more credits than any apprentice in history. But by all these materials and research, every single one, impossible. There were just too many types. And these were only the ordinary ones. Above those sat supernatural materials, stuff infused with strange energies, laws, or concepts. Those were the real keys to crafting powerful magical instruments and potions. My mountain of credits? Compared to the wizard civilization's vast material reserves, it was a single drop in the Pacific Ocean. Forget supernatural materials. Just collecting samples of every common material would evaporate my credits through purchasing, shipping, and storage fees alone. Guess I'll just take it slow. I sighed. The excitement from my big payday was fading fast under the crushing weight of just how enormous and complex the material science field actually was. My path to getting stronger was going to be way longer and harder than I'd imagined. I reined in my shopping spree impulse and only bought a handful of interesting materials that seemed to have equivalents in cultivation theory. Baby steps. After that, life settled into a rhythm. Classes during the day, then back to the lab to study alchemy, potion making, and rune theory. At night, I'd cultivate while diving deep into the Great Tao Book Pavilion's knowledge archives. With all this intense studying filling every hour, life felt full and focused. I even stopped obsessing over credits for a while. A month later, the Academy restocked 50 cubic meters of gold. This time I only bought 20 cubes, refined them into refined gold for my personal crafting stockpile. Didn't bother selling any. My leftover credits from last time were more than enough for now. Then one day after basic alchemy class, as I was heading back to my lab like usual, Instructor Clark stopped me. Which was unusual. Apprentice gymming, stone face, zero expression. Classic Clark. Instructor? Something wrong? My gut clenched out of habit. He didn't seem to notice my tension. Just asked in that emotionless monotone, "What research have you been doing lately?" Is this you showing concern? I blinked at him, trying to read literally anything from that poker face. Nothing. As always. I decided to be partially honest. I've been trying to familiarize myself with the properties of various materials. Clark gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret. Then, without elaboration, "Go check the task board on the MagicNet when you get back." And he just walked away, leaving me standing there completely confused. Was that approval? Was that his pleased face? Honestly impossible to tell with this man. Sometimes I envied his permanent poker face. At least nobody could ever read his thoughts. I said a quick hello to a surprised Amy, then headed straight to my lab and pulled up the MagicNet terminal. Scrolled to the bulletin board. Same old low-level tasks as always. But right at the top, a brand new announcement. Workshop Urgent Project. Underground Storage Room Materials Sorting Initiative. Description. Wizard civilization has conquered countless planes, and the underground storage has accumulated massive quantities of unprocessed materials from past eras and foreign planes. These samples are diverse and complex. Volunteers needed for cataloging, cleaning, and basic property analysis. Duration, long-term, credit reward, medium. Special note, participants will have the opportunity to handle large quantities of unclassified rare material samples. An excellent chance to expand your materials knowledge. My eyes practically glowed. This was exactly what I needed. Legal access to a massive variety of materials with a chance to do preliminary research on them. And the fact that this task had been sitting there with zero takers? If there wasn't something fishy going on, I'd eat this entire desk. This was like falling asleep and having someone hand-deliver a pillow, a top-grade goose-down pillow. Privilege was truly disgusting. What's that? The privilege is for me? Oh, never mind then. Privilege is great. Without a shred of hesitation, I clicked Apply and submitted my apprentice ID. Submission successful. I looked back at the bulletin board to reread the details. The announcement was gone. Vanished. Like it never existed. I stared at the empty board for a moment, then it clicked. Wow. Not even pretending anymore. Huh. So that's what Clark's weird look meant. Sitting in my chair, staring at the now-blank bulletin board, I felt a wave of genuine gratitude wash over me. Now I truly understood what the second-level cultivation agreement meant. It wasn't just better credits and permissions. It was senior wizards quietly feeding me information and opportunities behind the scenes. This agreement had opened doors that regular apprentices didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, what I didn't know was that Clark was sitting in his own lab, watching his terminal confirm the task had been claimed, nodding with satisfaction before using his authority to close the listing. In a world where knowledge was power, nobody dared monitor a wizard's lab. That was a grudge worse than killing someone's entire family. But figuring out what someone was up to didn't always require surveillance. Sometimes, a person's recent purchase history told you everything you needed to know. I'd prepared myself for the talisman to fail completely. But this? What the heck was happening? Based on what I felt, the talisman did activate successfully. So why did it only produce this pathetic little flicker of flame? I tried a few more times and quickly figured out the pattern. The fire size was directly tied to how much true energy I pumped in. More energy, bigger flame. When I shoved most of my layer 3 true energy into it, the flame finally matched what the cultivation text described, which made it completely useless. If the talisman's power depended on how much of my own energy I fed it, I might as well just cast the spell by hand. At least that way I'd have more flexibility and wouldn't need to pre-make anything. Even worse, casting the same spell directly used less energy than running it through the talisman, because the talisman wasted extra power trying to activate parts of its program that couldn't function. Here, this was nothing like what the text said about only needing a wisp of spiritual energy to activate. After more testing, I compiled my findings and consulted the Great Tao Book Pavilion. Half a month of intensive reading later, combining the pavilion's books with advanced alchemy knowledge, I finally understood the fundamental difference between cultivation talismans and wizard world magical tools. A talisman isn't just energy storage. It's more like a precise launcher or program. I held up one of my golden talismans, studying the patterns carefully. The symbols on a talisman are basically index commands for calling upon environmental spiritual energy. During activation, the talisman uses a tiny bit of the user's energy as a key, then runs the symbols as a program to gather and ignite massive amounts of ambient spiritual energy from the surroundings. That's what produces the powerful spell. In a cultivation world swimming in spiritual energy, one tiny wisp is enough to trigger the talisman, which then pulls from the endless environmental supply to unleash devastating power. But in the wizard world, no spiritual energy in the environment. The talisman's program can't run properly. The tiny flame I got was just my own injected energy being briefly amplified through the talisman structure, not the talisman working as designed. Then I pulled out a wizard-made scroll. Animal hide, similar function, inject a bit of mental power, and it shoots out a fire spell. Cheap at just 10 credits, though most people preferred the 100-credit reusable wand version. I activated the scroll at a training target. It disintegrated into ash and launched a fireball. During the whole process, the surrounding elemental energy didn't change at all. Wizard tools work on a completely different principle. They store a complete spell, including all the energy needed to cast it, inside the item beforehand. The wizard just injects a tiny bit of mental power as a switch, and the preloaded spell fires at a fixed power level. Advantage: works anywhere, anytime, regardless of environment. Just recharge after use. Disadvantage: power is fixed based on whoever made it, not whoever uses it. Zero flexibility. If it's loaded with a fireball, you get a fireball. No adjustments. After laying out both systems side by side, my eyes suddenly lit up. I'd found it. The connection point to combine the best of both worlds. Cultivation talismans excelled at low activation cost and environmental energy harvesting. Wizard tools excelled at stability and guaranteed output in any environment. The wizard world's environmental energy wasn't spiritual energy, it was elemental energy. And it was everywhere. What if I used talisman design principles? But instead of trying to call on non-existent spiritual energy, I built the wizard spell model and instructions for calling on elemental energy directly into the device. That way, as long as the tool wasn't physically destroyed, the surrounding elemental energy, after years of gradual upgrades, my training room was completely unrecognizable from the basic setup I'd started with. The interior space had been expanded to more than double its original size. The walls and floor were made of special energy-absorbing material that dissipated any magical discharge. No experiments leaking outside. The old basic target in the center had been replaced with standardized testing targets and environmental simulation devices. The walls had energy emitters for defense testing, and there were 3D obstacles for speed and agility drills. There were even controllable elemental energy release points in the corners that could simulate different environmental element concentrations. I picked up the attack-type sigil instrument prototype first. Alright, activation test. The thing looked like a palm-sized metal disc, its surface covered in intricate sigil patterns that shimmered with faint light. I placed it on my palm and fed in a wisp of mental power, so tiny it was almost undetectable. Instant activation. The sigil patterns lit up with a soft red glow. Then the light surged together and a fist-sized fireball materialized out of thin air in front of the disc. Activation successful. Now attack test. Whoosh. The fireball shot out like an arrow, screaming toward the heavy metal target in the center of the room. Boom. Direct hit. Now, this was technically just an apprentice-level fireball spell. But because the sigil instrument fired it instantly, while pulling in environmental fire element energy to fuel it, both the power and speed were noticeably better than what a same-level apprentice could cast on their own. The metal target had a deep dent punched into it, the surface scorched black and smoking. A satisfied glint crossed my eyes. Instant cast. Low energy cost. Full power. Control test. I activated the attack sigil again, but this time I threaded a more precise wisp of mental power into the disc the moment the fireball formed. The fireball trembled slightly, then, instead of shooting straight, it curved through the air in a graceful arc, swept around an obstacle next to the target, changed direction again, and smashed into the opposite side of the target with pinpoint accuracy. I kept experimenting, tried splitting the fireball into two smaller ones mid-flight. After leaving the teleportation point, I used my movement sigil instrument to zip across the vast wilderness of this savage plain at high speed. Below me, gray rocky terrain, twisted ancient vegetation, and the occasional bizarre beast flashing past. The whole place screamed, primitive and dangerous. I had no specific destination. Every move I made was about finding suitable test subjects and environments for real combat trials of my equipment. First encounter. A pack of 7 or 8 oversized lizard beasts. Hard keratin armor covering their bodies, acid spit attacks. They were hiding in the gaps between trees, their massive moss-covered bodies disguised as boulders, waiting to ambush anything that wandered past. I spotted them from the air, deactivated my movement sigil, and dropped to the ground. I didn't hide. I walked straight toward them. The first lizard attacked, a jet of green acid flying right at me. One thought, and my hidden shield sigil activated at full power. A thick, earthy yellow barrier instantly solidified around my body. Hiss! The acid hit the shield and sizzled viciously, sending up clouds of smoke. But the shield surface? Not a scratch. The acid just slid right off and dripped onto the ground. No real damage to the shield. No energy enhancement at all, just pure corrosive liquid, more acid incoming. I immediately switched to the wind element shield. An invisible membrane of wind started flowing across my body. When the acid hit this time, a clever redirecting force guided it around both sides of me, sending it harmlessly into empty space. Even the toxic fumes rising from the corroded ground got swept away by the wind currents. Against low-impact kinetic attacks like this, the wind shield's deflection works even better than expected. And it's amazing against gas-type threats too. The lizards realized spitting wasn't working, so they all charged out of hiding to go for the bite. I waited for the right moment and triggered my attack sigil instrument. FWIP, 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 FWIP. 4 fireballs condensed and launched from my fingertips in under 1 second, screaming toward the charging lizards at terrifying speed. I kept pushing deeper along the red ore-covered wasteland, still focused on hunting for rare and unique material samples. The native tribes I'd encountered earlier? Not really on my radar anymore. But while I was happily on my treasure hunt, the battlefields across the gray rock plain were turning ugly. Quick, there's a high-value point token over there. Some excited young apprentice pointed at a golden glow flickering on a dead tree. A 7-person squad crept toward it carefully. By now, all the easy, unguarded point tokens had been scooped up. The remaining ones had been deliberately placed near dangerous magical beasts. Higher value, higher risk, bigger rewards. With stakes going up, solo apprentices had started forming teams, and existing teams kept recruiting more members. These 7 were all considered talented, mini geniuses, back at the academy. After a few days working together, their coordination was getting pretty solid. But the attack didn't come from a magical beast. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Dozens of arrows coated in glowing poison sliced through the air from every direction, screaming toward them. These weren't normal metal arrows. They were made of bone, radiating faint but visible energy. Scatter! Ambush! The squad leader roared, throwing up an energy shield. Too slow. Several apprentices took hits from the poison arrows. Their bodies locked up instantly, faces turning blue-green, bizarre totem patterns crawling across their skin. Damn it, it's the natives. From behind bushes and between rock crevices, dozens of armored native warriors burst out wielding metal spears. Their bodies swelled visibly, muscles bulging, moving at shocking speed. Their eyes burned with the fury of revenge. Attack! The apprentices reacted fast. Fireballs, ice spikes, everything they had. But the natives didn't stand and fight. They moved like a wolf pack, sprint in, throw spears, scatter immediately, using the complex terrain to circle and harass. Captain, my teleportation rune won't work. One poisoned apprentice screamed in panic, his rune flickering and dying. My flight spell won't activate either. They have anti-air capabilities. Panic erupted instantly. Without their trump cards to fall back on, the gray rock plain, what used to be a mysterious primitive wilderness, had turned into a brutal hunting ground. And the hunters? Not the academy apprentices. The native coalition was showing a level of organization and intelligence that absolutely nobody had expected. These weren't just scattered tribespeople, they were trained predators. Every trap, every ambush, surgically targeted the apprentices' weaknesses. Damn it, it's the natives again. Anyone got recovery potions left? My mental power is almost gone. Why won't the escape ring work? There's no way out. Desperate screams like these were echoing across every corner of the gray rock plain. As trap after trap sprung successfully, apprentices quickly found themselves on the wrong end of a hunt. The native warriors hiding in the undergrowth wore beast skin camouflage, carried poison-tipped bone spears and bows, and moved as silently as vipers. They knew this terrain like the back of their hands. They'd bait apprentices with point tokens or rare materials, wait for guards to drop, then strike. One volley of unexpected poison arrows was usually all it took. Instant paralysis or slowdown. Then the native warriors would charge in with that terrifying burst strength of theirs, moving so fast their metal spears would punch through an apprentice's body before they could even raise a shield. Scattered apprentice squads got absolutely wrecked in the opening ambushes. Flight spells and escape rings, everyone's safety net, all failed under those bizarre spatial disruptions. Without their emergency exits, the apprentices were like caged animals being slowly picked apart. The broadcast communication devices filled with broken distress signals, one after another going silent. Shield energy down to 10%. My wand is out of charges. Why won't these natives just quit? In one narrow canyon, a squad of 8 apprentices had their backs literally against the wall, barely holding off a native cavalry charge. Their magical tool energy was draining fast. Several shield devices were cracking under the strain, making horrible splintering sounds before shattering completely. Potion supplies were visibly shrinking. The mental exhaustion from constant high-intensity combat was crashing over them like waves, spells getting sluggish, magic losing its punch. These were senior apprentices too. When they'd heard the emergency broadcasts about the newer students, thousands of Nolan Academy apprentices, riding high on the blind confidence from their earlier fake victories, came flooding into a valley that intelligence had identified as the native chieftain's base. Their eyes were glittering with dreams of high scores and glorious battle achievements. Not a single one of them realized they were marching straight into a perfectly constructed trap. The dense magical beasts guarding the valley entrance barely slowed them down. The apprentices blasted through every obstacle and poured into the valley depths like an unstoppable wave. Deep inside, a few native chiefs wearing top-quality armor came into view, backed by a small but fully armed force of supernatural warriors. Enemies. Those must be the leaders from the intel report. Watch the surroundings. Expect ambushes. Shields up just in case. Charge. Take out those chiefs. The apprentices erupted in excited battle cries. Led by Augusta and Horn, they surged forward with overwhelming aggression. Augusta was crackling with lightning, moving fast as a bolt. Horn had rocks rolling beneath his feet like a walking earthquake. Everyone else unleashed their magic, elemental torrents of every flavor converging on the enemy position. But the instant the two sides were about to collide, everything changed. Rustle, rustle, rustle. The hillsides around the valley, dead silent just moments ago, suddenly came alive with countless dark figures. A suffocating number of native warriors, wearing beast hides and woven grass, clutching longbows and throwing spears. They'd hidden themselves perfectly, using animal skins and vegetation for camouflage, with shamans and priests suppressing their life signatures. The apprentices' sloppy scouting had never stood a chance. Fire, one deep command, laced with ancient shamanic chanting, and tens of thousands of native warriors on the slopes drew their bows simultaneously. Arrows fell like rain, a sky-blackening, suffocating downpour of arrows descending on the apprentices trapped in the valley below. And these weren't ordinary arrows. The natives had bet everything on this one battle. Every single arrow was enhanced with shamanic and priestly spells and supernatural power. The arrowheads themselves were forged from special minerals and biological materials. Boom, 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 boom. 12 fireballs screamed down from the sky, trailing long tails of flame, slamming into the dense native formation below. Before they even hit, my mind had already shifted to the next set of sigil instruments. Hum, hum, hum. Another 12 fireballs. A split second later, the third set activated. Hum, hum, hum. Another 12 fireballs. With my current mental power and insane processing capacity, while still maintaining all my defensive shields and flight sigils, I could simultaneously activate 3 fireball-type sigil instruments at once. Each one could fire 4 fireballs per cycle at maximum output. I divided my remaining 9 attack sigils into 3 groups, rotating them in sequence, which meant, theoretically, I was raining down 36 fireballs per second in a nonstop bombardment. The millisecond-precise switching between groups was an absolute nightmare of mental strain. But my spiritual power was so far beyond any normal apprentices that I brute-forced my way through maintaining this hellish output rhythm. This was firepower that ordinary apprentice wizards couldn't even dream of. An endless, unrelenting, practically infinite flood of destruction pouring from the sky. Below me, the native coalition had just launched their grand total assault. Momentum at full peak, ready to crush the apprentices' last defensive line once and for all. But what they met wasn't the feeble resistance of exhausted students. They met death, raining from directly above. Boom, boom, boom. Explosions erupted one after another. The earth shook under the endless fireball barrage. Flames shot skyward, painting the entire valley blood red. The extreme heat vaporized soil and vegetation instantly, leaving nothing but scorched craters. The natives' proud, dense formations, their greatest tactical advantage, became their worst nightmare under this kind of indiscriminate carpet bombing. Metal armor twisted and melted. Bodies turned to ash in the terrible heat. The arrow volleys stopped. The cavalry charges broke apart. The shaman's chanting was cut short mid-syllable. Fear spread through the native army like a virus. Before, facing the apprentice's magic, They could at least rely on numbers and coordination to grind them down. But this endless, infinite storm of fire pouring from the sky above, the native leaders struggled with everything they had, but it was useless. They were pinned to the ground by sheer pressure alone. Not a single one could move. These were people who'd been top-tier warriors and mages in their own kingdoms. And here, someone was holding them down without lifting a finger. This kind of power was completely beyond their understanding of what mortals could do. By now, even the slowest among them could see it. This priest, Oswaldo, had orchestrated everything deliberately. And he was definitely not what he seemed. Oswaldo, why? Are you betraying our world? The Knight Commander forced the words through his throat, voice cracking with pain and confusion. Oswaldo seemed to have just finished communicating with some unseen entity. He finally turned around and looked down at the kneeling Knight Commander with a strange, amused expression. Don't misunderstand. I was never on your side to begin with. Then what are you doing? Why did you send those armies out? Why did you lure that monster here? The shaman chief demanded. Oswaldo squatted down casually in front of the Knight Commander, looking nothing like the solemn, dignified priest they'd known. Just a lazy, careless smirk. Still don't get it? I've already lifted the mental suggestion. Use your brain. He tapped his own temple mockingly. Do you people actually know someone named Oswaldo? Does this priest even exist in your world? Every leader froze. They did have memories of Oswaldo, his name, his identity, details of him participating in their plans. But when they actually thought about it, their faces twisted with horror. All that information about Oswaldo had just appeared in their heads, like it had always been common knowledge. But beyond those planted details, nothing. His past, his background, when and how he joined their coalition, all of it was blank. Nobody knew. It was as if an extra person had simply materialized among the scattered survivors during their retreat, and everyone had just accepted him without question. How? Why? This bizarre stranger who clearly wielded power far beyond mortals. Why had they handed him their lives and the fate of their entire world without a second thought? Ice-cold dread crawled up their spines. But you can use the sky god's power, a priest blurted out, voice shaking with disbelief. If you're not a real priest, how could you wield divine power? We can tell. That power belongs to our world's god. Divine power? You mean this? Oswaldo glanced at the agitated priests with a flicker of contempt. He thought for a moment, flipped his hand, and a transparent glass-like sphere appeared in his palm. Inside that sphere, every kneeling native could see a miniaturized figure frantically pounding against the walls, screaming silently, trapped in an unbreakable prison. The priests weren't the only ones who started trembling. Leaders, soldiers, everyone shook with terror, letting out whimpers of pure fear. Even shrunk down, they recognized that figure instantly. The sky god, their devoutly worshipped deity. One of the 12 great gods of their entire plane. The god whose statues stood in every kingdom, whose face every child learned from birth. Despite the miniaturization, the divine essence, that unmistakable aura of a higher being, was still radiating clearly enough for any mortal to identify. And this supreme, great god was trapped like a toy, sealed in a little glass ball, played with like a trinket by some unknown entity. For a minor plane, producing 4th-level beings is actually impressive. I heard your god king even reached 5th level? Quite the research specimen, Oswaldo said casually, rolling the sphere between his fingers like he was evaluating merchandise. Too bad I was too slow. Only managed to grab this bird brain. Before he even finished, one of the priests, faith and spirit completely shattered, let out a wail and slammed his head into the ground. Dead. Oswaldo watched the natives crumble, faith destroyed, spirits broken, with zero emotion. Just a little shake of his head, as if their weakness bored him. He waved his hand. The imprisoned sky god got compressed further inside the sphere, and then the ball split, producing an identical copy. Here, this thing contains your god's power. Get some priests to communicate through it. We'll use this to send you information going forward. Someone will be in contact. He said all this like he was giving casual instructions, then sank his consciousness inward to exchange a few more words with the senior Nolan Academy wizards stationed outside the plane. Then his body rippled like water and vanished completely. Inside the tent, only the kneeling, ashen-faced, utterly devastated natives remained. Them and that transparent sphere on the ground, reflecting an eerie light. Their world, their gods, their hope, all of it, shattered in this one moment. They finally understood. What they'd been fighting wasn't an enemy. It was beings from a higher plane wielding powers beyond their comprehension. And their proud revenge plan? From the very beginning, it had been nothing more than a carefully designed game. A long silence passed. The old Knight Commander, former leader of a royal order, rose to his feet, trembling. He stood quietly for a moment, then bent down and picked up the transparent sphere. A priest started to protest, but shrank back under the old man's razor-sharp gaze. Do we really have to obey them? A shaman asked, voice raw with pain. The old Knight Commander closed his eyes. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. When he spoke, his voice sounded like rusted metal scraping together. This is our world's last hope. Not bad. Smart kid. Saved us a lot of trouble. In some hidden chamber deep inside Nolan Academy, a group of wizards were gathered as usual. The magical screen above their heads was playing footage of everything I'd done in the Grey Rock plane. Oswaldo's figure materialized among them. Even though he'd already left the plane, he could apparently still observe everything happening inside it. Watching the old Knight Commander pick up the ceiling sphere, he looked satisfied. If that old man hadn't shown any sense, we'd have had to wipe them all and import new creatures from another plane. Good work, the slightly balding wizard, the same one who'd checked my fate threads during my review, nodded at Oswaldo. Oswaldo waved it off casually. No big deal. Those guys were zero challenge. Warm up at best. Clark gave a small nod and turned his attention back to the screen. With a thought, he fast-forwarded through my entire experience in the Grey Rock plane. When the footage showed me hovering above the native army, unleashing an endless rain of fireballs, even Clark couldn't hide a glimmer of admiration. Oswaldo watched alongside him, clicking his tongue in amazement. This kid's got real power. Though he clearly has zero exploration drive. No wonder you guys contacted me separately to lure him toward the battlefield. But seriously, that fireball output is insane. The firing speed and sustained duration. He's practically at the level of an apprentice who's independently constructed their own fireball spell model, isn't he? He glanced at one specific wizard in the room. Apparently one of the ultra-rare geniuses who'd actually built an attack spell model during the apprentice stage. That wizard tilted his head. More or less. Different attributes, so the destruction looks different, but during my apprentice days I could probably match his firepower. His sustained output is a bit shorter than mine was, but his short-term burst is stronger. Overall, very close. He paused, watching the footage of me single-handedly carpet-bombing an entire army. But his flight skills and shield work? Those are also ridiculously good. That part one couldn't match at the apprentice level. Oswaldo smacked his lips enviously. Man, I'm jealous of these genius types. But if I'm reading the energy right, the only spells this kid has actually constructed himself are alchemy and analysis techniques from the energy signatures. Yes, the wizard glanced at Clark. Clark nodded without hesitation. His shields, flight, and fireballs are all achieved through magical instruments. Well, obviously I could tell that. The kid basically showed his hand at the end. Oswaldo sidled up to Clark with a greasy, pleading grin, rubbing his hands together like a fly. So, can you make those instruments? I'll pay 10 times the going rate. No. Clark didn't even blink. Come on. Really can't. Really can't. So it's the kid's own proprietary tech then? Oswaldo let out a dramatic sigh toward the ceiling. Great. So I can't get custom equipment anytime soon. Among alchemy wizards, there were unspoken rules about custom orders. Normal instruments? No problem. Order from anyone qualified. But unique proprietary designs? Those wizards only sold products one level below their own rank. For a 5th-level wizard like Oswaldo, the minimum he'd want was 4th-level gear, meaning he'd have to wait until I reached 5th level before I could make it for him. That'll take forever. I'm shipping back to the battlefield in 100 years. Oswaldo looked ready to throw a tantrum on the floor. Very dignified for a senior wizard. Clark gave him a cold look. You could just not go. Hee hee. Not possible. Oswaldo straightened up, grinning again. All my resources for advancing to 6th level depend on my next tour of duty. There was an interesting phenomenon in wizard civilization. Apprentices feared military service like the plague, but the higher ranked a wizard got, the more eager they were for planar warfare. The gap in attitude was so extreme that the Star Rail Tribunal had to create regulations forcing high-level wizards to periodically return home to mentor younger generations and manage civilian territories. For wizards above 3rd level, going to war had actually become a reward. You needed to spend military merit or contribution points just to earn the right to deploy to the front lines. Clark ignored the clown and turned to another wizard. "I'm leaving the Grey Rock Plain liaison work to you. Have them rebuild their population as fast as possible. Provide resources if necessary. You want to make this trial a permanent fixture for the Academy," the other wizard caught on. Clark nodded. Apprentice quality has been declining for years. This trial proved it. Textbook knowledge alone is meaningless. They need real experience to truly learn. Haha. Well, the front lines are more desperate for manpower than ever. They've even loosened the deployment requirements for senior wizards. "We definitely can't train apprentices with the old mortality rate methods anymore," Oswaldo chuckled, then looked a bit worried. "Annual cross-planar trials are great and all, but that's a lot of extra resources. Just this one trial burned through enough materials and energy to fund 2 6th-level research projects. The cost is high, but the results speak for themselves. Let the dean figure out the resource problem." Haha, the dean's gonna lose IT when he gets back. All right, moving on. It's time to distribute the aptitude enhancement potions again. While the senior wizards were having their secret meeting, the teleportation plaza lit up like a fireworks show. Waves of apprentices came pouring back from the Grey Rock Plain like survivors crawling out of a nightmare, battered, exhausted, looking like absolute wrecks. The air here smelled like the Academy again, cold, faintly magical. No more burnt flesh and blood. Then a massive light screen unfurled above the plaza. The final trial rankings. Every single apprentice, no matter how beaten up, no matter how mentally drained, locked their eyes on that screen. This was the final accounting of everything they'd risked their lives for. Names refreshed rapidly at the top. First place, Bert Vera Augusta, 23,541 points, no surprise there. That girl fought like a thunder goddess throughout the entire trial. Smashed through more ambushes, killed more magical beasts, and collected more point tokens than anyone. Her destructive power was absolutely terrifying and completely at odds with her delicate appearance. But the second name made the crowd murmur in confusion. Second place, Bill Lingblack, 21,965 points. Most people had no idea who this was. Not from any famous family, not one of the Academy's well-known geniuses. I squinted at the name, dug through my memory, and finally placed him. The frail-looking kid who'd scored 9 on soul purity during the entrance assessment and then completely vanished from everyone's radar. He'd been taken as a direct disciple immediately after the test and dropped out of sight. Over the years, people had actually forgotten he existed. But that was strange. A talent that exceptional shouldn't fade from memory so easily. Then it clicked. Everyone suddenly realized they'd been subconsciously overlooking this guy's existence all along. 9-level soul purity. My eyes narrowed with understanding. With that kind of talent, combined with the right soul-based techniques, you could reach almost unimaginable levels of stealth, detection evasion, and mental influence. The fact that he'd erased himself from everyone's awareness was itself proof of his mastery. I had a pretty good guess about how he'd gotten second place. He hadn't fought those bloody battles at all. Instead, he'd used his gifts to slip past everyone undetected, infiltrated the Native Coalition's core territory, and at the last moment swept up all the point tokens the natives had collected from dead apprentices. A completely different approach from Augusta's brute force dominance. If I ever had to face him on a real battlefield, that would be one nasty opponent. Meanwhile, back in the secret chamber, Oswaldo, the same senior wizard who'd played the priest role, was lounging on a couch, half listening to policy discussions. When he saw Bill's name hit second place, he lit up like a proud parent. "See that? That's my student," he bragged to the room. "I told you, soul-type talent has the highest potential." Silent until the thunder strikes, the other wizards barely glanced at him. They were used to his personality. And while the method was opportunistic, achieving those results through soul talent alone was genuinely impressive. They were more focused on the broader data, survival rates, exposed weaknesses, training gaps. Back in the plaza, the rankings kept scrolling. No real surprises after the top spots. Most survivors from the Valley battle had scraped together some points from the cleanup, but couldn't compete with the leaders. My name appeared at 36th. Perfectly fine by me. I hadn't gone out of my way to collect point tokens. I'd spent most of my time hunting for materials and clearing whatever got in my way. Top 10% was all I needed, and that secured my spot in future Nolan Workshop qualification exams. What did catch my attention was that Amy ranked 35th, one spot above me, and Victor came in at 48th, both in the top 500. I understood immediately. Those two were among the rare apprentices who hadn't charged into that final native war. They'd seen through the natives' fake weakness, avoided the trap entirely, and while everyone else was busy getting slaughtered, they'd used sharp instincts and safer strategies to scoop up scattered point tokens and valuable resources. Smart. I walked over to Amy. Congrats. Jimming. Her face broke into a bright smile. Thanks. And congrats to you too. 36th is amazing. Still one spot behind you though, I said evenly. Footsteps approached. Victor appeared silently beside Amy. He looked at me, eyes calculating as always. After a moment of deliberation, he managed what appeared to be a sincere smile. Congratulations, both of you. Amy and I exchanged a glance and laughed. For someone like Victor, voluntarily being friendly was rare. The brutality of this trial, combined with our results, had clearly made him reassess the two of us. In Victor's world, that meant we'd proven ourselves worth investing in. Neither of us had any real issue with his transactional personality. He hadn't harmed our interests, so we accepted his congratulations gracefully. Thanks. Congrats to you too. Victor, just as the three of us were exchanging pleasantries, or more accurately, carefully feeling each other out, I noticed the atmosphere around us shift. All three of us looked up sharply. Every single apprentice in the entire plaza was staring at us. Not just the apprentices, even the senior wizards standing at the edge of the plaza, the ones recording data, were looking over with curious, evaluating eyes. Amy and Victor both tensed up, then realized the stares weren't aimed at them. Every single pair of eyes was locked onto the person standing between them. Me. I was confused for a second, then it clicked. This was supposed to be the award ceremony. Normally, the first-ranked apprentice walks up first, then everyone follows in order. But nobody was moving. Nobody stepped forward. They just stood there, silently, staring at me with impossibly complex expressions. These were the apprentices who'd been eyeing that valley. The ones who'd watched me hovering above the battlefield, pouring down an endless flood of fireballs that single-handedly annihilated an entire native army. My official ranking was 36th, just a number on a board. But in the hearts of everyone who'd survived that blood-soaked valley, the person who broke the siege alone with overwhelming, unstoppable firepower was the real number one. No question, no debate. Rankings meant nothing in the face of that kind of power. That instinctive awe, that primal respect for raw strength, had turned even the proudest, most arrogant geniuses in the academy into silent, waiting figures. They all subconsciously agreed. The one who shattered the rules should claim his reward first. Even Augusta, officially ranked first, proud as a queen, just stood there with a defiant scowl. Her eyes were full of refusal to accept it, burning with competitive fire when she looked at me. But even SHE didn't step forward. Even she silently acknowledged it. What did you do? Amy whispered, poking my arm. Victor looked equally lost. He and Amy were among the few who'd skipped the Valley battle entirely. Most logistics apprentices had made the same smart choice, since they'd only built one or two support-type spells and weren't really built for combat. Nothing much. Just a small incident, I said, half exasperated, half amused. I didn't care about rankings. But with everyone frozen like statues, someone had to break the silence. I walked straight up to the senior wizard handling the awards and handed over my badge. He took it without expression, scanned the data, injected a small pulse of energy, and that was it. 36th place reward, 1,000 academy credits. Not exactly life-changing. For apprentices who'd nearly died chasing scraps of points, maybe that was decent. For me, the rare materials I'd collected were worth way more. The moment I stepped back, the entire plaza exhaled. Like an invisible chain had snapped. The frozen atmosphere melted instantly, and everyone started moving, excited, calm, or disappointed, filing up to collect their rewards in order. The noise and chatter returned. But something had changed. I wasn't the quiet, slightly weird loner anymore. The looks people gave me now carried awe, curiosity, respect, and more than a little fear. Whispered conversations followed me everywhere, fingers pointing, hushed voices retelling what I'd done in the gray rock plain. The name on the board, the number next to it, none of that mattered. To everyone who'd witnessed that valley of fire, I was the most brilliant and most terrifying talent in this entire trial. I just pocketed my badge, picked up my beast hide bag, and walked away like none of it concerned me. Because honestly, my head was already somewhere else entirely, thinking about how to improve my sigil instruments and what new designs to build next. Back in my lab, I felt something unexpected, a sense of coming home. Instead of resting, I dumped out my entire bag of materials. Samples from the gray rock plain, all shapes and sizes, many radiating strange energy signatures my analysis spell couldn't fully decode yet. I sorted them into categories with a satisfied nod, then turned my attention to the sigil instruments on my belt. The damage was ugly. Out of 10 fireball sigils, aside from the one I'd used for testing that only had minor rune damage, the rest were in terrible shape. Cracked casings, warped runes, destabilized energy cores. The flight sigils were nearly all overloaded. Only the defensive sigils had survived relatively intact. What a waste. I ran my finger over a scorched fireball sigil, sighing quietly. I had alchemy skills, but fully repairing these instruments, with their precision runes and complex energy conduits, was beyond my current ability. The trial had showcased the sigil instruments' incredible offensive firepower and mobility, but it had also exposed serious gaps. Like the ambush situation, I'd had no way to detect danger in advance. In complex terrain like the Gray Rock Plain, I had zero effective scouting capability. I'd relied entirely on passive sensing through analysis and alchemy, and both of those degraded badly in resource-rich environments. Detection, tracking, stealth. I sat at my desk, fingers tapping unconsciously. Those are my next priorities for sigil instrument development. The wizard system had detection spells, magic vision, life sense, energy detection. But those all required active casting, couldn't maintain continuous surveillance, and their energy signatures were easy for enemies to detect or jam. Detection spells fall into two categories, enhancement type and scanning type. Enhancement ones were simple enough. They just buffed your existing senses, no special research needed. Just buy a few appropriate instruments and stack them up. The real challenge was scanning type detection spells. Most standard scanning spells work like radar. Fire once, get one set of results. Low energy cost, but it creates detection gaps between scans. Sure, continuous feedback versions existed, but at the same power level, their effective range was way smaller than the one-shot types. The range problem I could probably solve with my sigil instruments. But the other issue? That's the real killer. Beyond energy consumption, the biggest bottleneck for scanning spells was information processing. My sigil instruments ran on environmental energy harvesting from cultivation principles. Barely any personal cost to activate. If I built detection capabilities into a sigil, I could theoretically run continuous scans without worrying about energy drain. But even if I built such a thing, the results would be no better than a regular wizard casting the spell manually. Because my brain couldn't keep up with the data. Too much information flooding in would clog my thinking, even crash my mental processes. If I spammed detection sigils too aggressively, I wouldn't need enemies. I'd fry my own brain. That was exactly why most scanning spells were designed as one-shot pulses rather than continuous streams. Wizards could easily build continuous versions with the same range, but it was pointless. Nobody's brain could handle the data flow. And while processing power grew with wizard level, the detection range and data volume grew exponentially faster. Back in my old world, radar operators had computers to help, but wizards here had to process everything with their brains and souls alone. Wait, what if I built something like a computer? An auxiliary processing device to handle the information. I jumped onto the magic net and started searching. The results were complicated. Wizard civilization did have such things, and they were all extremely high-level tech. Artificial souls, runic AI, and living spirits that combined both approaches, all capable of auxiliary computation. The problem? Way too advanced for me. Artificial souls were the pinnacle of alchemy, couldn't even touch that below 6th level. Runic AI was slightly easier, but only slightly. The development difficulty was comparable to, maybe even harder than, building real AI back in my old world. Algorithm logic, response mechanisms, runic programming. Each one alone could bury you. And living spirits, that combined both technologies? Sure, they got the best of both worlds. They also inherited all the difficulties of both. Building an auxiliary processor from scratch at my current level? Basically impossible. Even if I bought the complete manufacturing methods outright, the time needed to master and build one was staggering. I'd be better off just getting stronger directly. Only when my raw power hit a bottleneck requiring long periods of consolidation would it make sense to circle back to this research. The classic dilemma of strength versus knowledge accumulation. Supernatural worlds always throw this at you. The second problem was compatibility. Like spatial rings, most artificial constructs only worked in specific planes. Move to a new plane with different rules or constants, and they might just stop functioning. The fix? Just find a sixth-level wizard to stabilize the rules. And we're right back where we started. I scratched my head, then dove into the Great Tao Book Pavilion for solutions. The pavilion offered options too, commanding souls, creating formation spirits, things like that. But the problems were identical. My cultivation level was too low. Even the simplest method, soul commanding, required preserving the soul intact for auxiliary computing, which was incredibly difficult at my level. There is one solution, but I can't pull it off yet. Looks like I need to level up first, so the enhanced detection idea was shelved for now. But I could still work on basic detection sigil instruments in the meantime. Over the following period, I devoured everything the magic net offered: rune theory, alchemy, materials science, planar studies, sensory spell techniques. But even basic detection sigil research was far from smooth. Detection runes were way more intricate than attack or movement runes. How do you make a sigil see things instead of just blasting energy? How do you transmit that information back? How do you keep it from broadcasting detectable energy signatures that enemies could pick up? I tried designing various rune combinations, but quickly hit a wall. Most wizard system detection runes relied fundamentally on the caster's mental power extension. Hard-coding that mechanism into an external instrument either severely weakened the effect or kept the energy cost just as high. That's why most detection instruments on the market only offered enhancement-type effects, sharper vision, life sight, that sort of thing, or took roundabout approaches like projecting light and shadow onto target areas instead of direct scanning. Can't just copy wizard system runes directly. I picked up an energy-absorbing mineral in one hand and a crystal sensitive to life force fluctuations in the other. So I'll have to borrow. From cultivation methods for connecting practitioners to external objects, I carved life detection runes onto the crystal, modified cultivation style, linking runes onto the mineral, then connected both with a conduction rune. First attempt, the crystal cracked. Second attempt, the mineral blasted out energy waves more obvious than the life signals it was supposed to detect. Basically screaming, "Hey everyone, I'm scanning you," at maximum volume. Yeah, this approach needs work. I wiped the sweat off my forehead. I'd successfully linked to the crystal, but the mineral had no concept of what life actually was. Even with detection runes carved in, it was just blindly broadcasting scanning pulses outward. I needed a fundamentally different method, something with better discrimination. Back to the research. While digging through the magic net, I stumbled across a theory about planar resonance. Dense and hard to read, but it mentioned that all matter in a plane's deep structure produces faint resonance with other matter, creating a kind of mutual awareness. Lightning bolt to the brain. Resonance. What if instead of actively sending out detection waves, I used passive resonance? Resonance, I muttered. Maybe I could combine the concept of perception with materials that naturally resonated with specific wavelengths, then use runes to capture and amplify that resonance, and finally, store or transmit the amplified information through another set of runes, all without broadcasting any detectable energy. I redesigned everything around passive resonance and perception capture as the core principles. Time flew. One late, quiet night, I carefully embedded a complex array of over a dozen micro-runes into a tiny transparent crystal no bigger than a fingernail. The crystal itself was special. I'd refined it from multiple materials using the Great Tao Book Pavilion's concept extraction method. It carried a partial concept of perception and was extraordinarily sensitive to energy fluctuations. I activated the sigil. No sound, no energy ripple. The crystal just trembled slightly. I closed my eyes and reached out with my mental power. Nothing at first. I didn't give up. Using what I'd studied, I formed a deeper, resonance-style connection between my soul and the crystal. Then I felt it. A faint, blurry wave drifting back from the crystal. The life signatures of a few plants stored in the lab's storage room. It worked. Weak, fuzzy, tiny range. But I'd successfully created a prototype sigil instrument that connected to my soul through passive resonance for detection. The prototype looked like a tiny transparent eyeball. It could float in the air, sense life and energy fluctuations within a limited area, and transmit that blurry information back to me through our resonance link. I'll call it the scouting eye. Crude, but the direction is right. My eyes were practically glowing with excitement. Over the following days, I threw myself into optimization. Different materials, improved rune structures, added concealment runes, all trying to increase range and clarity while reducing the device's own energy signature. Through endless rounds of trial and failure, my understanding of runes and energy deepened dramatically. And all that intensive research inadvertently pushed my cultivation right up against its next bottleneck. Perfect timing, actually. My cultivation is holding me back. So many ideas in my head that I couldn't execute because of power limitations. The wizard system wasn't safe to advance in right now due to the contract, but my cultivation system had no such restrictions. Time to break through. Chi refining layer 7. Entering the late stage of Chi refining. Not just a major increase in true energy, but a leap in spiritual sense strength and range. My cultivation felt perfectly ripe. Years of constantly tempering my true energy and soul had been like drawing about tighter and tighter. Now it was time to release. In my training room, I cranked the elemental particle concentration to maximum and sat cross-legged. Eyes closed. Full focus on guiding my true energy and spiritual awareness. The true energy inside me, normally a calm lake, started churning under an invisible force. Following my technique, I gathered and compressed that massive energy, launching it toward the next level. It was not easy. Every compression sent stinging pain through my meridians. Every surge tested my willpower. Sometimes the energy surged back like angry waves, my meridians rumbling in protest. Sweat beaded across my forehead, but my will didn't waver. My mental power worked like a relentless press, compressing again and again. Hours passed. Maybe a day, maybe longer. Crack, a soft sound, like glass shattering, echoed through my awareness. The barrier broke. True energy flooded outward into wider meridians, free at last. Total energy volume surged, becoming denser, flowing like liquid mercury. But the real surprise was my spiritual sense. It practically exploded. Before, I could barely cover 100 meters. Now, hundreds of meters, effortlessly. Everything around me appeared in razor-sharp detail I'd never experienced before. The faint energy hum of lab equipment, the tiny cracking sounds of minerals, even plant roots winding through soil underground. All of it crystal clear, like someone had turned up the resolution on reality itself. The world felt more alive, full of visible lines and patterns I couldn't perceive before. I could even sense the subtle moods of elemental particles, active, dormant, agitated. Layer 7. Late stage Chi refining. Officially achieved. I smiled with deep satisfaction. This power jump was bigger than any previous breakthrough. And the first thing that came to mind? My scouting eye research. With this level of cultivation, I could build something much better. I couldn't wait. I grabbed the scouting eye prototype and my prepared upgrade materials. With my new level 7 spiritual power backing me up, my precision with runes and materials jumped to a whole new level. I restructured the rune arrays, adjusted energy flow paths, and wove in finer, more delicate runes. After a round of refining and reshaping, the once crude crystal transformed into something genuinely beautiful. The internal runes seemed almost alive, glowing with a soft, restrained light. Still the same crystal eyeball shape, just perfect now. This should work. I floated the new scouting eye in the air. I shut down my lab's protective barrier, activated the sigil, and connected my consciousness to it. Then I walked to the door, placed the eye silently on top of the doorframe, and sat back down. This time, no more blurry, scattered nonsense. The scouting eye had become an actual eye. It projected everything within several hundred meters directly into my spiritual awareness. I could clearly see apprentices walking down the corridor, sense the life force fluctuations inside their bodies, even distinguish the faint energy signatures of the magical instruments they were carrying. And it was continuous, like having a security camera feed piped straight into my brain. As long as the eye wasn't destroyed, it kept streaming data with almost zero mental power drain on my end, just the bare minimum to maintain the soul connection. Still had flaws, of course, limited range, couldn't see through thick walls or powerful barriers. In chaotic environments full of energy interference, its effectiveness would probably tank. And it was purely passive, no active scanning or tracking capability. Tons of room for improvement. I looked at the floating eye with burning enthusiasm. Honestly, its current range was still worse than me just actively casting my alchemy and analysis spells. But I'd built the prototype. From here, it was just optimization along the same path. I put the scouting eye back on my workbench and turned my attention to something I'd been planning for a long time. The detection sigil research had direction now. My cultivation had reached late-stage chi refining, which meant I could finally start my most important project yet. Artifact forging. Time to create my very first true Dharma treasure. According to my cultivation techniques, late-stage chi refining was the threshold. Enough true energy accumulated, spiritual sense strong enough for complex tasks. You could begin learning the higher auxiliary skills. And the most important one was artifact forging. Sure, even weak cultivators could make small gadgets. But the only thing that counted as real artifact forging produced one result: a Dharma treasure. A Dharma treasure was a concept unique to the cultivation system. Not just a powerful tool. It was a manifestation of the cultivator's own Tao, a soul-bonded life artifact that could grow with you and develop incredible power over time. Fundamentally different from wizard instruments. Wizard tools relied on external energy and precise construction. Their power depended on materials, runes, structure, and the energy level poured in. The connection to the user was relatively indirect. A Dharma treasure required fusing your own true energy, spiritual sense, even a sliver of your soul essence into the object. You tempered the material's spiritual potential with your own inner fire, carved formation arrays, embodying your understanding of the Tao, and created something that resonated perfectly with your own energy signature, something you could control as naturally as your own limbs, that grew stronger as you grew stronger. Artifact forging wasn't just a craft. It was the process of turning your understanding of the universe's rules into a physical object. For me, beyond the combat power boost, the real reason I wanted a Dharma treasure was to fill the gaps in my current combat system. I didn't lack offensive capability, my sigil instruments covered that. What I wanted was the Dharma treasure's inherent spiritual awareness. This was exactly why I'd prioritized the scouting eye research before tackling the AI assistant problem. My plan was to use the Dharma treasure's budding spiritual intelligence as an information processing terminal, a personal assistant to handle the data overflow my brain couldn't manage alone. Spiritual awareness wasn't exclusive to Dharma treasures. High-level wizard instruments and runic AIs could develop it too, even full intelligence under the right conditions. But at MY current level, a Dharma treasure was the only option for creating something with a spark of awareness. I sank into the depths of my consciousness and started browsing the Great Tao Book Pavilion's massive catalog of Dharma treasure designs. Given the differences between the wizard world and a cultivation world, my requirements were pretty demanding. Cultivation requirement couldn't be too high. Had to use the most primitive forging methods since proper forging furnaces needed golden core level to build. Minimal dependence on spiritual energy since this world had basically none. Offensive treasures were out. I didn't need more firepower. No rare materials I couldn't source. The spiritual awareness it developed had to be strong enough for information processing. And ideally, it should cover my defensive and survival weak points. After listing all those requirements, even I felt like I was being ridiculous. But the Great Tao Book Pavilion still gave me an ocean of options. After days of browsing through that ocean, I finally found my target. Dharma treasure, the 5 aggregates rainbow mirror. The Five Aggregates Rainbow Mirror. According to the Great Tao Book Pavilion, once completed, this Dharma treasure let you transform into light itself with a single thought. Insane burst speed for a short time. During the transformation, you'd be immune to most physical attacks and could even phase through thin energy barriers and non-solid obstacles. The ultimate escape tool. Downsides? Plenty. Zero offensive capability. Zero defensive capability. Each use drained the vast majority of your true energy and spiritual sense. And because the escape effect scaled with your level without any cap, the proportional drain stayed brutal no matter how strong you got. Strictly an emergency panic button, not something you spam. Also, at low cultivation levels, you could only go in a straight line and couldn't control your landing point. That problem wouldn't ease up until the nascent soul stage. And since the treasure was soul bonded, if someone managed to shatter it while you were in light form, your soul would take catastrophic damage. But for me, all those downsides were basically irrelevant. I needed an escape option. That was my biggest gap. And if things got bad enough to use this thing, I wasn't planning on fighting back anyway. Even at the lowest level, the Rainbow Mirror let you escape at near light speed. If someone could intercept that, then with my current power level I should just sit down and die peacefully. No point worrying about soul damage at that point. The real headache was the crafting process. Forget the technique difficulty. The materials alone were fun. Every core material was a concept material. The whole operating principle was harvesting, condensing, and then writing the concept of light. The core concepts: light speed, penetration, color, rhythm, and birth and death cycle. Turning formless concepts into a physical object, then having that object transform you back into conceptual light when needed. Beautiful in theory, nightmarish in practice. The 5 types of light I needed to collect, in plain terms: dawn light, rainbow light, moonlight, starlight, and lightning light. Each represented a unique property of light, corresponded to certain elemental attributes, and matched the 5 aggregates in the treasure's name. Every type had to be captured directly from nature using specific techniques at specific times and places. At least these were all things that existed in the wizard world. Way better than treasures requiring materials that flat out didn't exist here. The crafting difficulty is no joke though. Just the true fire requirement is a headache. No furnace needed, but I had to use true fire to temper spiritual potential, condense the artifact embryo with spiritual sense, fuse concepts into the object, then finally forge the soul bond. True fire as the spark, spiritual sense as the tool, materials as the bones, concepts as the soul, I recited mentally. These were both the most fundamental and most critical techniques of artifact forging. The Rainbow Mirror was basically a test of how well you'd mastered the absolute basics. First things first, let me try condensing true fire. Wizard fire spells called on external fire elements, completely different from a cultivator's true fire. True fire was hyper-condensed true energy infused with the cultivator's own spiritual essence. It could purify impurities from materials and awaken their latent spiritual potential. I braced myself for a long grind. The pavilion said ordinary cultivators could take years to produce their first true fire. Then, wait, that's IT. I'm done already. I stared at the tiny, rice grain-sized pale golden flame hovering in front of me. Total time spent, less than 1 day. Am I actually a genius? Just kidding. I knew exactly why it happened so fast. Who would have thought that all those years of practicing alchemy and analysis spells would transfer directly to true fire condensation? What a bonus. Alchemy started with using mental power to analyze everything around you. Analysis spells trained energy wave perception from day one. Both could be used on yourself. Combined, they'd given me a level of self-control over my own power that far exceeded normal cultivators without me even realizing it. True fire, done. Next step, constructing the artifact embryo, the carrier for the light concepts. Using specialized embryo condensation techniques, I'd shape a spiritual power-based embryo connected to my consciousness. This would serve as both the treasure's foundation and the vessel for the concepts. It required fusing some of my own true energy and soul essence into the material, giving it basic, spiritual awareness and plasticity. After capturing the invisible concepts hidden within natural light, I'd use special methods to convert them into tangible forms, light essence dew, or light crystal sand. Then fuse those into the embryo through repeated tempering. Once that step was complete, the treasure would technically be formed. After that, it was just months or years of continuous refinement to strengthen the bond. Embryo condensation practice, light concept harvesting, scouting eye improvements, other sigil instrument upgrades. Oh right, I also need to study pill making and magical pharmacology. My schedule is going to be packed. I stretched and listed out everything ahead of me. The Rainbow Mirror's hardest part wasn't the forging itself. It was all the light harvesting, prep work. But I had time. The Nolan Workshop's academy-wide qualifying exam was still 5 years away. Plenty of runway. I looked up at the window and realized, without noticing, morning had arrived. And then a thought hit me. One of the Rainbow Mirror's required materials, Dawnlight, Woodfire attribute, represents Genesis, the speed and penetration of the very first ray of light piercing through darkness as all things awaken. Must be collected at the crack of dawn, during the transition between the last moments of night and the first moments of day, specifically while the purple chi from the east hasn't fully dissipated. I looked at the sun peeking over the horizon and instinctively activated my technique, extending my hand toward the morning light. A soft, luminous glow settled into my palm. I couldn't help but grin. Good omen. Time flew by. Shortly after deciding on the Rainbow Mirror as my Dharma treasure, I submitted an application to leave the academy and head out into the world. Made sense. Nolan Academy was basically its own self-contained little world. Extremely stable internal environment. Seeing a sunrise in here was already a lucky bonus. Moonlight, starlight, a rainbow after rain. Unless you specifically hired someone to create those conditions artificially, forget about it. So to collect my crafting materials, I had no choice but to go out and travel. Thankfully, as a second-level cultivation agreement target, I had privileges equivalent to an official wizard, which meant I could actually get permission to leave. Without that status, just gathering raw materials would have been a nightmare. But after leaving the academy, I didn't rush straight into material collecting. Instead, I actually did what my application said. I traveled around and explored different regions. After all, since transmigrating into this world, I'd spent my entire previous life stuck in a tiny medieval town. Same small-town scenery, day after day, year after year. Then one random day, the local lord's servants showed up at our house and announced I'd tested positive for wizard talent. But whether it was traveling to the lord's estate or arriving at Nolan Academy, everything had been through teleportation arrays. And back then I'd been so terrified that I hadn't spared a single thought for sightseeing. I have to say, though, the wizard civilization's talent pipeline system is impressively thorough. I couldn't help making that observation after leaving one of the cities. My sightseeing tour didn't last very long, though, because I quickly noticed something unsettling. Across Nolan Plain No. 13, no matter which region I visited, every city looked like it had been stamped from the same mold. Besides minor clothing differences due to local climate, everything else was almost identical. Not just customs and culture, even city layouts, the number of surrounding villages, their distribution patterns, all eerily similar. The wizards had calibrated the entire civilization's productivity with remarkable precision. Most people could eat well and live comfortably as long as they worked hard enough, but getting genuinely wealthy wasn't easy either. Basic education taught only fundamental literacy and math, just enough so that new recruits arriving at the academy wouldn't need remedial lessons. Even in the most remote little villages, the wizards had, luckily, what I needed were concepts, not physical objects. As long as the light qualified as moonlight in people's understanding, I could harvest the concept from it. Full moons were rare on Nolan Plain No. 13, roughly once every 3 months. And tonight was the night. Standing on a highland peak, I bathed in that cold, cleansing moonlight and ran the specialized light harvesting technique from the Great Tao Book Pavilion. Moonlight's concept was nothing like dawn light. No explosive force. Instead, it carried a quality of stillness, restraint, like something that could quietly seep into everything. When my spiritual sense touched the moonlight, I didn't feel impact. I felt a gentle embrace. I patiently guided my true energy like weaving a soft net, capturing that sense of tranquility and endlessness. When I snapped back to awareness, I saw a warm glow nestled deep in my energy center. Without hesitation, I pulled out a bottle of rootless pure water, basically dew infused with spiritual energy. Easy enough to make by simulating condensation conditions in my lab and saturating an area with true energy. I guided the captured moon concept into the water, then carefully nurtured it with true fire. Under my direction, the moonlight concept dissolved into the water like dye, giving it a faint silver-white halo. The droplets became tiny moons, cold, gentle radiance. This was light essence dew, the raw crafting material containing condensed light concepts. The beauty of the rainbow mirror was that most processing happened during material collection. Each of the 5 lights required different preparation methods, so no special furnace needed. One night's work yielded 4 drops of moonlight essence dew, carefully stored in a refined gold bottle. Third concept, starlight. Starlight carried the concepts of distant anchor and constant guide, the quality of unchanging light piercing through infinite void, always pointing to a fixed direction. Collection required a clear, moonless night with visible stars, which was annoyingly hard to find on this plane. I traveled to a massive desert deep in the continent's interior. Zero light pollution. The night sky looked like black velvet studded with billions of jewels. More importantly, the water element was thin enough here that the water elemental plane's reflection couldn't project a false moon. Perfect conditions. Under that ocean of stars, I chose a construct marked on maps as Titan's Grip, a plane-level strategic installation built by wizards, as my primary starlight source. An artificial construct from wizard civilization was about as stable as it gets. Unless the entire civilization collapsed, that thing wasn't going anywhere. The hardest part of capturing star concepts was feeling that sense of distance and permanence, light that had crossed infinite space and endured countless ages without changing. It demanded extreme patience. Over half a month of attempts before I found the trick, feeling like my spiritual sense had pierced through the entire plane to touch something impossibly far away. Once I caught a wisp of the concept, it felt like holding an unwavering coordinate in my palm. I channeled it into a pure crystal, carefully condensing it with true fire and spiritual sense. The star concept solidified into a tiny grain of light crystal sand that sparkled with stellar radiance. No sharpness like dawn crystal, no softness like moon dew, just a steady, anchoring pull towards something distant. Several more moonless desert nights later, I had 3 portions of starlight crystal sand. 4th and 5th concepts. I collected both during the same event. I specifically sought out a region with unique weather patterns and waited an entire month during dry season for a massive thunderstorm. Lightning light contained the concepts of instantaneous force and tearing power, the most explosive and dangerous of all 5. To harvest it, you had to get close to a lightning strike and capture the lingering electric afterglow before it dissipated. I positioned myself at the highest point of the storm center, surrounded by protective sigil instruments as insurance. When a blinding purple bolt ripped through the sky with a deafening crack, I activated my technique simultaneously, plunging my spiritual sense into that brief flash of aftermath. Pure explosion and destruction, violently uncontrollable power. The instant my senses made contact, it felt like my brain got struck by electricity. Searing pain. Through sheer willpower, I locked onto that wisp of concept and slammed it into a lightning-sensitive crystal. Crack. The crystal split open, but inside, a grain of crystal sand blazing with fierce purple-white light stubbornly survived. It radiated a feeling of extreme eruption and tearing, like it might detonate at any moment. I kept going back in throughout the storm, got zapped by stray energy multiple times, burned through several protective sigil instruments. Final count, 3 portions of lightning crystal sand, every single one radiating a terrifying aura of destruction. Last one, rainbow light, contained the concepts of bridging and illusion between real and unreal. I'd made a few attempts before, but only captured trace amounts. After the thunderstorm cleared, a spectacular double rainbow appeared across the sky. Perfect. I quickly harvested the rainbow concept and channeled it into rainwater I'd collected during the storm itself, guiding the fusion with true fire and spiritual sense. The resulting light essence dew shimmered with brilliant 7-colored radiance, like a miniature rainbow bridge. It practically hummed with the feeling of connection and illusion. And with that, in less than a year, I'd traveled across multiple corners of this plain. Mountain peaks at dawn, moonless deserts, post-rain grasslands, raging thunderclouds. 5 types of light concepts, successfully collected. Each carrier material glowed with its own unique radiance and conceptual signature. I packed away every precious sample with extreme care. Next step, forging the heart mirror itself. I had the soul of my Dharma treasure. Now I needed to build its bones and flesh, condensing the artifact embryo and binding it to my consciousness. After collecting all 5 types of light concept materials, I headed straight back to my private lab at Nolan Academy. After all this research, I had the next steps memorized. The process boiled down to fusing the concept-infused essence, dew, and crystal sand into the artifact embryo. But first, I needed to create that embryo. An artifact embryo wasn't something that physically existed from the start. A cultivator had to use their own purified true energy and a sliver of soul essence to condense a phantom projection inside their mental sea. It was the Dharma treasure's foundation, the anchor point for concepts, intimately connected to the cultivator's consciousness. The bridge between formless and physical. According to the Great Tao Book Pavilion, this was supposed to be extremely difficult for a late-stage qi refining cultivator. Normally, you'd need special formations to concentrate spiritual power or expensive rare medicines to stabilize your focus. Otherwise, years, maybe a decade or more of daily visualization practice, slowly hammering that wispy mental image from illusion into reality. A grueling test of talent, patience, and resources. I prepared for a long war. My original plan was to finish this treasure before deploying to the front lines. That was the plan. I sat cross-legged, pulled my consciousness inward, and entered my mental sea. That vast, familiar space of chaos spread before me. My soul sat at the center like an anchor, surrounded by 9 massive truth runes that were constantly devouring elemental energy from outside. So much energy that colorful vortexes had formed around each one. Ignoring the spectacular scenery I'd gotten used to, I projected my will into my soul core and began following the pavilion's instructions, trying to condense a phantom projection of the heart mirror. And then I realized this wasn't nearly as hard as I'd expected. In fact, it felt almost familiar. My soul opened its eyes inside the mental sea, wearing a thoroughly confused expression. After a moment of thought, I beckoned, and 2 golden spheres that had been hovering at the top of my mental sea floated down. Of course, the principle of condensing an artifact embryo in the mental sea was shockingly similar to constructing truth runes and spell models in the wizard system. Both processes involved taking abstract theories, concepts, and rules, then building stable, functional spiritual structures inside your mental sea. Truth runes were especially close. Wizards condensed their understanding of universal rules into powered runic structures. That was basically identical to the concept-bearing work needed for a Dharma treasure embryo. I'd done this kind of precise mental construction literally thousands of times. My understanding of how to manipulate, shape, and stabilize abstract concepts in my mental sea was leagues beyond cultivators at my level. And best of all, I could cheat. Without hesitation, I switched to wizard meditation practice. Fragments of truth rune structures began forming in my mental sea. Normally, wizard apprentices could carve extra truth runes beyond the standard 9, but extras wouldn't function and would actually block advancement to first-level wizard. So no sane apprentice would do it. But I didn't want complete truth runes. I wanted the components, the geometric building blocks that made up each rune's internal structure. I cherry-picked the pieces I needed and recombined them for my own purpose. In less than 1 month, I successfully condensed a palm-sized, semi-transparent little mirror in my mental sea. The artifact embryo of the 5 aggregates rainbow mirror. Pure crystallized spiritual power, glowing faintly, seamlessly connected to my soul. An extension of my very being. Now came the most critical and dangerous step, fusing the 5 concept materials into the embryo. I pulled out all 5 precious samples: dawn, rainbow, moonlight, starlight, lightning, each radiating its own unique glow and aura. After centering myself, I sank back into my mental sea and positioned the heart mirror embryo at the focal point of my consciousness. Then, very carefully, I guided the first material, dawn light crystal sand, into my mental sea with spiritual sense, steering it toward the embryo. The instant the dawn crystal touched the phantom mirror, it erupted with blazing golden red light, its power surging violently against all containment. The embryo shook hard, hairline cracks spreading across its surface as if it couldn't withstand the conceptual impact. I stayed calm. I'd studied this process inside and out. This was supposed to happen. The embryo and the concept needed to shatter and reform together repeatedly before they could truly merge into one. Like forging steel, break it, fold it, hammer it, repeat. Of course, the cultivator had to provide a little help during this process. I ignited my true fire. A pale golden flame rose from my energy center, guided by spiritual sense, carefully threading into my mental sea to wrap around the heart mirror embryo. The true fire wasn't just heat. It served as a catalyst and bridge, activating and connecting the concept materials to the embryo. Since I'd invested my own true energy and spiritual power when harvesting those concepts, they shared a common origin with both me and the embryo. The true fire simply awakened that connection. Meanwhile, my powerful spiritual force acted like invisible hands, carefully guiding the dawn concept as it flowed through the mirror, settled in, and fused layer by layer. The drain on my resources was staggering. Maintaining the true fire consumed massive amounts of true energy, while the precision work of guiding concept fusion pushed my mental power control to its absolute limit. This was where having two cultivation systems really showed its value. The truth runes ran on autopilot, constantly absorbing elemental energy, converting it, generating fresh true energy to replenish what I burned. And as for precision control, my very first self-constructed spell model was alchemy. I'd been doing fine manipulation work since day one. But even with those advantages, I had to maintain absolute focus. One moment of distraction and the concepts could go haywire. The embryo might shatter, or worse, my entire mental sea could take damage. I successfully fused the first dawn crystal sand into the embryo. The golden red glow dimmed slightly, but the surface cracks deepened. Unstable. Next, rainbow light essence dew. The seven-colored dew entered the embryo and immediately clashed with the dawn concept already inside. Rainbow's illusory nature and dawn's sharpness were like oil and water. The embryo shook violently, nearly flying apart. I pushed true fire and spiritual sense to their limits, trying to stabilize both sides while mediating between the concepts. This wasn't material science anymore. This was a battle of ideas. I wasn't melting metals. I was harmonizing meanings, properties, and rules. Failure. The embryo lurched, cracks spiderwebbed everywhere, and the whole thing exploded inside my mental sea. Cough, cough. I doubled over, face going white as paper. My mental sea screamed with pain. My soul felt like it was being torn apart. The backlash from a failed forging attempt. I collapsed on the floor, drenched in cold sweat. Too hasty. The conflict between concepts was worse than I thought, and I didn't fully understand how different concepts relate to each other. I dragged myself upright and analyzed what went wrong. Concepts came from conscious minds, so handling them was inherently subjective. Resolving conceptual conflicts was less like material processing and more like doing reading comprehension. Damn it. Reading comprehension is my worst subject. I sighed and checked my mental sea. Serious internal damage, though the truth runes were already stabilizing things. The injuries would take time to heal, though. The embryo was completely shattered. A big chunk of the damage I'd taken came from the soul-linked embryo breaking apart. The light concepts themselves were fine, though, recondensing into separate glowing orbs of different colors after the embryo burst. A normal cultivator in this situation would spend weeks recovering, then another year or two rebuilding the embryo from scratch. They say late-stage chi refining can forge Dharma treasures. Yeah, theoretically. This is completely unreasonable for a normal cultivator at this level. Now I understood. Any regular late-stage chi refining cultivator trying to solo forge this treasure would get absolutely destroyed. As for me, let's see. Third level soul repair potion. Perfectly restores all soul damage for beings below third level official wizard. Only 10,000 credits per vial. Buy. Actually, better safe than sorry. Give me 5. Less than a minute after ordering on the Magic Net, the potions materialized on my lab's delivery platform. I grabbed one test tube-sized vial and downed it in one gulp. A cool, refreshing wave washed through my soul. Total time from injury to full recovery, 1 minute and 20 seconds. The power of money. As for the shattered embryo, I dropped back into my mental sea, waved at the truth runes, and a dozen small component fragments floated over immediately. The hardest part of building an embryo was finding the right structural models from within the truth rune architecture. But once I'd already found the right pieces, reassembly was just assembly line work. A new perfect embryo materialized in my hands within seconds. So exactly 90 seconds after my first failure, I started attempt number 2. I might be terrible at reading comprehension, but if I just kept trying, I'd eventually figure out the perfect answer. After several more days of grinding through failures, I successfully guided all 5 light concepts into the heart mirror embryo one by one, fusing them under true fire and spiritual sense. Finally, with all 5 concepts introduced and merged, the embryo underwent its final transformation. It trembled violently in my mental sea. Then a powerful pulling force appeared. Not pulling energy from outside, pulling from within, drawing my purified true energy and soul essence into itself. This was the critical step. The Dharma treasure bonding with its master, drinking its owner's power as the foundation for growth. As my true energy and soul essence flowed in, the embryo glowed brighter and brighter while simultaneously shrinking. Its form began to shift. The phantom spiritual construct, having absorbed its master's power and fused with 5 concepts, was becoming physical. I felt an extraordinary connection forming between us. Following the pavilion's instructions, I guided the solidifying embryo out of my mental sea, pulling it toward the Laogong acupoint in my palm, a critical meridian junction for channeling true energy and magical power. Many Dharma treasures chose to materialize here upon first creation. Warmth bloomed in my palm. The 5-colored glow gradually solidified. First a blurry outline, then textures sharpened. When all the light finally faded, a small, palm-sized, thin circular mirror lay in my hand. Its material was unlike anything, not metal, not jade. Semi-transparent, warm and smooth as polished stone. The surface was flawless as still water, no edges, the frame seamlessly integrated. And inside, 5 different colors of light, 5 different forms, drifted and swirled like living things, weaving around each other, creating a scene both dazzling and deeply mysterious. This was the embryo form of the 5 aggregates rainbow mirror, my soul-bonded life artifact, my very first Dharma treasure. Formless concepts, carried by the embryo and refined through true fire and spiritual sense, had crystallized into a real, tangible object. Of course, it couldn't do the light transformation escape yet. This was still just a newly formed embryo. But this marked the completion of the hardest, most fundamental forging step. I looked at the little mirror in my palm and smiled. From here, it was just patient, steady nurturing. After finishing the initial forging of the rainbow mirror, I suddenly realized I had free time. That was new. Didn't last long, though. Clark sent a notice calling me in. New apprentice aptitude testing, huh? Has it really been that long already? When Amy told me the news, I couldn't help feeling the weight of passing time. 5 years. I'd been at Nolan Academy for 5 whole years. From a clueless newcomer to a late-stage chi refining cultivator, 3rd-level wizard apprentice, with multiple extraordinary skills under my belt, I'd carved out my own unique path in this massive magical institution. And per Academy tradition, every 5 years came a big cycle, sending off the old batch of apprentices who'd completed their 10 years of study, while welcoming the new recruits selected from cities across the plain. My 5-year mark put me right at that transition point. The academy was buzzing with activity. The giant plaza was decorated with lights, old apprentices hauling luggage and saying their goodbyes everywhere you looked. And then there was another group drawing attention, the wizards returning from the front lines. After 5 years of combat duty, they got pulled back for a 6-month rest period, partly to decompress and digest their battlefield experiences, and partly to serve as success stories for the incoming freshmen. I didn't feel much about any of it. The departing seniors weren't close to me, and welcoming new apprentices had nothing to do with my research. A knock at the reception room door. Amy, and I looked up to see Victor standing there. Victor, you got summoned too? Amy waved him over. He nodded with a hint of awkwardness. After the Grey Rock plane trial, his attitude toward me had shifted from arrogance to a complicated sort of equality. And after hearing about what I'd actually done there, that equality had become uncomfortable for him. But Victor was socially skilled enough to adjust quickly. You both got the notice? Looks like Clark called all of us in. Probably assigning tasks. Speaking of tasks, Amy made a face and whispered, I heard the academy's handing out a ton of boring assignments. Seeing off old apprentices, hosting returning wizards, and, get this, being plants in the new apprentice crowd. Plants? I blinked. Yes, we have to blend in with the new kids and pretend to be all starstruck by the returning combat wizards, hyping up their heroic achievements. Remember when we first enrolled and those fellow freshmen were gushing about the returning fighters? That was the previous batch of US. It all clicked. Those enthusiastic, new students who'd been so vividly describing frontline battles when I first arrived. Planted upperclassmen. I'd even made fun of them at the time. Wizards were nothing if not practical. Even their success showcases came with hired hype men. Are these tasks mandatory? I asked Victor. He shook his head, adjusting his sleeve. The Academy basically never assigns mandatory tasks outside of contract obligations. But the pay is generous enough that most people don't refuse. I've already accepted one. Hosting this batch of returning wizards. I heard they're all coming back from the Shadow Plane. Amy said, eyes curious. That place is supposed to be brutal. They might have trouble readjusting to Academy life. We'd need to show them around. Explain what's changed. Victor paused. Clark paused. Looked at me with a hint of approval. The Academy wants you to produce as much refined gold as possible. We'll act as middleman and sell it for you. Free of charge. All credits from sales go to you. Sell? I raised an eyebrow. This is just the Academy restocking its own supplies with extra steps. If you want to see it that way, that's roughly accurate. Just without the processing fees. Clark gave a dignified nod. He thought for a moment, then smiled, eyes deep and calculating. The Academy needs refined gold. For returning wizards, for reserves, for research. We provide raw materials and sales channels. You provide skill and labor. It's a partnership. How much refined gold does the Academy need, roughly, about that? Clark didn't answer directly, just repeated one thing. The returning wizards are coming back from the Shadow Plane. My eyelid twitched. Message received. They were basically gearing up to invade an entire world. The amount of refined gold needed for that was absolutely astronomical. You could work me to death, and I still couldn't fill that order. Don't flatter yourself. Clark shot me a look. Nobody said the Academy depends entirely on you. You're just one small piece of the war preparation system. Refined gold is just one small category of anti-corrosion materials. The real heavy lifting is done by senior alchemy wizards. All you need to do is burn through the Academy's stockpiled raw materials. I blinked, pulled out my portable MagicNet terminal, and logged in to check. The Academy didn't know my production method, but I wasn't naive enough to think they hadn't figured out the primary ingredient was gold. No matter how many decoy materials I ordered alongside it, that particular secret was no secret at all. One glance at the Academy's inventory, and I nearly flung my terminal across the room. Over 10,000 cubic meters of gold. Even with my improved abilities, converting all that into refined gold in a short time frame would turn me into a dried-out husk. Is it too late to back out of this task? Absolutely not. Clark's tone left zero room for negotiation. If you hadn't checked the inventory, maybe. But now that you've seen it, you're not going anywhere. Why? Why? Was it my imagination, or did Clark's smile just turn distinctly sinister? 3 days ago, the Academy's gold reserves were only about 100 cubic meters. He leaned in with a menacing grin. Gold, a material with limited uses that's annoying to collect. How do you think the Academy gathered over 10,000 cubic meters in just 3 days? I involuntarily stepped back from that smile. Then I noticed the faint dark circles under his eyes. Then the alchemy department badge on his chest. It clicked. Alchemy. Correct. Clark suddenly lunged forward and grabbed my head with one hand. He dangled me in front of his face like a baby chicken. His voice was low, heavy, and dripping with the exhaustion of an overworked corporate drone, I got dragged out of my lab and forced to do 3 straight days of manual labor. If you dare quit this task, I will transmute you into gold. Okay, I get it. I understand everything. I accept the task. I grabbed his wrist with both hands, legs flailing helplessly in the air. His grip was actually perfectly controlled. I could have broken free with a little effort. But seeing the sheer resentment radiating off him as he tried to drag someone else down with him, I figured going along was the smarter play. Besides, it wasn't actually a bad deal. The Academy was buying at market price and providing free raw materials. Just a lot of hard work ahead. Sigh. Watching me go completely limp in his hand like a dead fish, Clark's expression softened. He opened his fingers and dropped me. Stop moping. This task was issued by the workshop through the Academy. Complete it, and you earn 10 points of military merit. High-grade merit, no less. This is a prime assignment. Other people couldn't get it if they begged. Military merit, that's right. High grade. The instant I heard that, my dead fish act evaporated. Eyes bright, spine straight, fully energized. The military merit system worked similarly to the Academy's credit system. Value-wise, they weren't wildly different, but the exchange rates mattered. Academy credits to low-grade merit was roughly 10 to 1. High-grade merit? About 100 to 1. But the real difference was in what you could access. Academy credits only worked within Nolan Workshop territory. Step outside and nobody honored them. Military merit, though, low-grade merit, issued by the Star Ring Federation, was valid across the entire Federation. High-grade merit, issued by the Star Rail Tribunal, could be redeemed at major organizations across all factions of Wizard civilization. 10 points of high-grade merit had purchasing power equivalent to 1,000 credits, enough to unlock some official Wizard-level knowledge. Wizard civilization had 4 major factions beyond the special Star Rail Tribunal, each with unique philosophies and signature technologies. They weren't completely isolated from each other, but getting another faction's tech or special materials was extremely difficult. My second-level cultivation agreement included a clause connecting my sales channels to other factions, but in practice, it was mediocre. Other factions mostly bartered, slashed prices ruthlessly on unique goods, and flat-out refused to trade proprietary knowledge. So the actual value of the merit wasn't game-changing, but it meant more options. And most importantly, high-grade military merit was the currency senior wizards had to spend to earn deployment rights to the front lines. But the Academy is actually willing to hand out high-grade military merit as a reward? Can the Dean even afford that? After the excitement wore off, I calmed down and noticed something odd. Like Clark said, the Academy definitely wasn't just commissioning me. Every senior wizard who was decent at alchemy was probably being ordered to produce anti-corrosion materials too. I was just a third-level apprentice. My output and product quality couldn't compare to senior wizards. The merit was probably distributed based on individual contribution, which meant the Academy's total payout was massive. And these were high-grade merit points. You couldn't convert between credits and merit, or between high and low-grade merit. The only way to earn high-grade merit was completing Star Rail Tribunal missions, and accepting those missions required at minimum a 7th-level wizard. In all of Nolan Academy, the only 7th-level wizard was the mysteriously absent Dean. Why do you think the Dean hasn't shown his face all these years? Clark's expression shifted into something rare, pure schadenfreude. He's been at the front lines doing grunt work, obviously. HSSSS. The image of the all-powerful, mysterious Dean toiling away as a laborer nearly made me burst out laughing. But considering I'd eventually be working under this person, I forced my face into an awkward wince instead. Cough. Wow. Supporting the entire Academy single-handedly. The Dean is truly a role model. Go ahead and laugh. That old coot isn't exactly dignified anyway. Clark gave me a knowing look. Perhaps the shared bond of being overworked softened his expression a bit. I suppressed my grin and changed the subject. The Shadow Plane sounds like a real headache. It's a unique plane. The creatures exist in a half-elemental, half-biological state. The Shadow Element's special properties have caused major wizard casualties. Clark shared the intel freely. My second-level agreement gave me clearance for this stuff. If it's that tough, why doesn't the Dean just handle it personally? I couldn't help asking. From the Academy's relaxed attitude, there probably wasn't anything at the Dean's level in there. And the higher a wizard's rank, the bigger the gap between them and same-level beings from other civilizations. Even if there were 7th-level creatures in the Shadow Plane, a dozen of them with the entire plane's backing probably wouldn't be enough for one of the Dean's hands. Because that world has a deity equivalent to a 6th-level being. Huh. I tilted my head. Clark ignored my confusion and asked instead, "What do you think is the purpose behind wizard civilization's obsession with planar warfare?" I blinked, thought carefully, then answered cautiously, "For resources and knowledge." "Good. At least you're not blind like those idiots." Clark smiled approvingly. "We don't wage war because we enjoy destruction, though some fools do. The vast majority of wizards participate in planar wars simply to acquire more knowledge and resources to push themselves further. If a plane immediately surrendered all its knowledge and resources upon first contact, wizards wouldn't bother destroying the native civilization. They'd even welcome them as new vassals. Nolan Workshop has quite a few vassal planes that joined exactly this way. Even if natives resist fiercely, wizards don't mind. They might even prefer it, because war catalyzes the birth of new knowledge. Some factions go so far as to deliberately match their forces to the target plane's overall strength, keeping warfare at maximum intensity to generate the most new knowledge possible. Clark glanced at an inconspicuous bracelet on his wrist. Of course, those extreme types usually belong to the Crimson Court faction. The Star Ring Federation's philosophy leans more toward what I described first. Can you really call either of these factions good or evil? My eye twitched. In my mind, both the Star Ring Federation and the Crimson Court were war criminals of the highest order. Neither one was innocent. What's that? I'm a member of the Star Ring Federation now? Oh well, never mind then. Still, I understood now why the Academy was willing to burn so many resources for the Shadow Plane. A plane this troublesome probably held proportionally impressive knowledge and resources. I noticed Clark watching me and cleared my throat. If that's the case, shouldn't the Dean intervene even more? At least that would preserve most of the resources. That's exactly the problem. Clark shook his head. A 6th-level being isn't impressive on its own. A decent 5th-level wizard could take one down in a straight fight. But once a being reaches 6th level, it can access the plane's source. Even without a wizard's precise control over planar origins, a rough application is enough to drag the entire plane down in mutual destruction. Now I understood. It all came down to cost-effectiveness. If the wizards pushed too hard and backed the deity into total despair, their whole invasion could end with nothing to show for it. So how do you deal with a situation like this? 3 options. First, bring in an even stronger wizard. An 8th-level wizard can forcibly suppress a being's attempt to destroy a plane, even against another 8th-level opponent. Second, gradually deploy forces to weaken the plane's overall power until the planar source degrades enough. Or, Clark paused, looking meaningfully out the window. A wizard achieves 6th-level advancement inside that plane. I fell into deep thought. The first method, finding an 8th-level wizard, was basically a fantasy. Sure, wizard civilization had plenty of them, but they were all stationed alongside the 9th-level wizards on the real front lines, pushing into uncharted territory. What Nolan Academy handled, even the entire Nolan Workshop's territory, was the leftovers of leftovers in the grand scheme of planar warfare. Not even bandit suppression, more like post-war cleanup. So forget about borrowing an 8th-level wizard for one little plane. The second method, gradually weakening the plane's source, was the Academy's standard approach. Bonus, it also intensified the war, which generated more knowledge. As for the apprentice casualties along the way, just necessary costs. Even the apprentices themselves wouldn't argue that point. Bluntly speaking, one senior wizard was worth more than thousands of low-level ones. So from the civilization's perspective, Method 2 was a win-win. The third method was conceptually simple. 6th-level beings could access a plane's source, but only if the plane didn't resist them. Foreign invaders at that level would struggle unless they forcibly dominated the entire plane. But someone who advanced to 6th level while already inside, the plane would accept them naturally, even if they were originally an outsider. One insider holding the plane's source in check, and the rest of the wizards could clean up easily. Of course, reaching 6th level was absurdly difficult. The percentage who made it each generation was terrifyingly low. All right, that's enough information. Clark patted my shoulder. Rest up, then get to work. Those returning wizards aren't exactly patient. I stumbled back to my lab in a slight daze. No time for complaining. The instant I got back, the gold started arriving, batch after batch, piling into my storage room like small mountains. Over 10,000 cubic meters of the stuff. The next 2 weeks were a blur of pure suffering. I knew the refining process by heart, so to keep myself from literally dying, I built an efficient production line, true fire at the core, combined with material processing arrays and energy conduction techniques borrowed from Wizard Alchemy. I plugged myself into the assembly line as the central component. Pale golden true fire burning day and night without pause. Gold blocks fed into the processing array, entered the true fire zone, got refined. Massive true energy consumption, constantly replenished. My spiritual power wielded alchemy like invisible hands, precisely controlling every step, stripping impurities, extracting conceptual essence. Even with the production line, those 2 weeks were brutal. This wasn't just mentally draining, it was physically exhausting too. I barely closed my eyes the entire time, only pausing for brief meditation recovery sessions when I hit absolute rock bottom. I was chugging spiritual recovery potions like water. At my worst, I actually felt bloated from drinking too many. When the last batch of gold went through the line and spat out a final gleaming ingot of refined gold, I let out the longest sigh of my life. I walked out of my lab with dead eyes. The sunlight hit my face, and I squinted like a mole emerging from underground. Body felt completely hollowed out. Red-rimmed eyes. Hair a total mess. Now I understood why Instructor Clark, a 6th-level wizard, always looked slightly disheveled every time I saw him. I ran into Amy and Victor at the plaza. They'd apparently just finished their own assignments. Jimming, Amy yelped the second she saw me. What happened to you? You look like you just crawled out of a mine shaft. Victor stared too, visibly shocked. He knew I'd taken the Academy's big commission, but hadn't expected a workload heavy enough to wreck someone who was normally so composed. Just finished a big job. Little tired, I said, rubbing between my eyebrows, voice hoarse. What kind of job does this to a person? Amy pressed. Materials processing. It was rough. I kept it vague. Victor was curious too, but we weren't close enough for him to push. Though I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Not just surprise, but almost envy. Other apprentices got worn out too, sure, but something about the way I looked right now reminded him of the senior wizards. A broadcast announcement interrupted us. The farewell ceremony for the graduating apprentices was about to begin. We stayed and watched from the edge of the plaza as the batch of apprentices who'd completed their 10 years of study followed their instructors toward the teleportation array. Heading to some frontline plane. Heading to war. I wonder which plane they're being sent to, Amy murmured. Victor recalled something from conversations with his father, probably the shadow plane. I heard that one's really difficult. They'll need reinforcements. The shadow plane. That's rough luck, Amy whispered. I heard the fighting there is intense. Normally, one graduating class of Nolan apprentices was enough to conquer an average plane. Costly, sure, but manageable. If a single class couldn't finish the job, that meant the plane was seriously dangerous. Could be worse. I offered a different perspective. At least the shadow plane situation is already well documented. They can adjust their spell models and equipment beforehand. Way less dangerous than exploring a completely unknown plane. 10 years of elite training counted for something. Even facing an extremely intense battlefield, going in prepared meant they wouldn't be caught completely off guard.